Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Revenger What If. In today's episode, we explore, what if Naruto arrived in Westeros and his shadow clone army made every great house kneel in one night. Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Orange Storm. The village didn't have a name worth remembering. That was the first thing Naruto noticed. No sign above the well, no carved marker at the crossroads, just a cluster of stone and thatch buildings hunched together like people trying to stay warm. Maybe 40 houses. A mill. A small sept with a cracked bell that hadn't rung in weeks, judging by the spiderweb across its rope. He'd been standing at the edge of the tree lean for about 30 seconds, getting his bearings, when the screaming started. Kurama's chakra stirred in his gut, not a warning exactly, more like a reflex. Something's wrong over there. Naruto was already moving before the thought finished. The soldiers were wearing red cloaks. 8 of them, armored, moving through the village with the practiced casualness of men who had done this many times before and expected to keep doing it. 2 were dragging sacks of grain from a storage house. 1 had his boot on the back of an old man's neck. The remaining 5 had formed a loose semicircle around a cluster of villagers, women, children, an elderly couple clutching each other, while one of them, the one with the sergeant's stripe on his pauldron, was explaining something in a tone that suggested he found the whole thing mildly tedious. "Third time we've come through, and third time you lot look at us like we've done something wrong. Lord Tywin's army needs feeding. That's just what is. Now if you'd stopped hiding your stores last month, we wouldn't need to take the goats too, would we, hey?" The sergeant stopped. Turned. Naruto was standing in the middle of the road with his hands in his pockets. He'd landed in this world in his standard Hokage attire, the white coat with the red flame trim, the black underneath, the headband catching the thin morning light. He looked, by Westerosi standards, completely insane. Bright blonde hair. Whisker marks on his cheeks. An expression on his face that wasn't angry, exactly, but had the very specific quality of someone who had already made a decision and was just letting the other party catch up. "You need to put him down," Naruto said, nodding at the old man under the boot. The soldiers looked at each other. The one with his boot on the old man's neck actually laughed. "And who in the 7 hells are you supposed to be?" "Someone who's going to ask you once," Naruto said. The sergeant took a step forward. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been broken and reset enough times it had stopped bothering to apologize for itself. He put his hand on his sword hilt. Not drawing it, just resting it there, a statement. "Son, I don't know where you come from dressed like that, but you're going to want to." Naruto crossed the distance between them in something less than a second. He didn't hit the sergeant. He just appeared in front of him, close enough that the man reflexively took a step back and tripped over his own feet, and then Naruto stepped past him, reached down, caught the wrist of the soldier standing on the old man, and lifted. The soldier came up off the ground entirely, boots dangling, and then Naruto set him down 2 meters to the left with an almost gentle thud. The old man scrambled away, coughing. "Okay," said the sergeant, and now the sword came out. All of them drew, which Naruto thought was probably the most consistent thing about humans regardless of world, the instinct to make the situation worse when embarrassed. He sighed through his nose. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, and his voice had changed slightly, still calm, but with a weight underneath it. The same weight he used to carry as a kid but wore differently now. Not desperation. Certainty. "I really mean that. You're going to put the swords away, leave whatever you took, and go back and tell your lord that this village is under my protection. Every village from here to the coast." "Kill him," said the sergeant. 3 of them came at once, which was at least organized. Naruto sidestepped the first, caught the second sword arm and redirected it so the soldier stumbled forward into the third, and flicked the sergeant's blade out of his hand with 2 fingers and a burst of chakra that made the sword ring like a struck bell and clatter 20 feet away into the dirt. Nobody moved for a moment. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he said. "Seventh Hokage. I don't know what a Hokage means to you, and right now that's fine. He looked at the sergeant, who was staring at his empty hand with an expression of profound disbelief. But you're going to know my name. All of Westeros is going to know my name. I'm just letting you be first. He smiled. It was a genuine smile, wide and a little crooked, which somehow made it more unsettling to the soldiers than anger would have. They ran. Naruto watched them go, then turned to the villagers. An older woman with flower dust still on her hands was staring at him with her mouth open. A small boy behind her had both fists pressed against his cheeks like he was physically holding his own face in place. You all right? Naruto asked. The woman opened and closed her mouth twice. The grain, Naruto said, glancing at the sacks. Is that yours? She nodded, faintly. Okay. He picked up both sacks, carried them back to the storage house, set them inside. Came back. Dusted his hands off. Do you have somewhere you can go for a few days? Somewhere inland, family, something like that? And my sister, the woman said, slowly finding her voice. In Tumbleton. Go there, Naruto said. Not unkindly, but firmly. Those soldiers are going to come back with more soldiers. I'll deal with it, but I'd rather know you're not in the middle of it when I do. He had already started doing the math. He'd landed in, somewhere. Some version of somewhere. The soldiers were armored but not in any style he recognized. The buildings, the language, the approximate level of technology, no chakra signatures anywhere, which was the strangest thing. In his world you could feel people at distance, there was always a faint buzz, even from civilians. Here there was nothing. Total chakra silence. Which meant he was operating with a reserve that had no natural ceiling in this environment. Which meant, practically speaking, he could make clones for a very long time. So where am I? He asked Kurama. The fox's presence inside him shifted, thoughtful, which was still a strange thing to feel from a creature that had spent decades communicating exclusively in rage. Different world. I can't feel any of our dimensions' resonance. We're cut off. Good cut off or bad cut off? We're still alive, so I'd call it survivable. Beyond that I have opinions and no data. Naruto crouched down in the dirt road as the villagers began moving, slowly at first, then with gathering urgency, pulling children and old people toward their doors to pack. He pressed 2 fingers to the ground and let his sage mode open just slightly, not the full transformation, just enough to read. The land itself was old. Not old like the elemental nations were old, layered with history and chakra and the ghosts of ancient battles, old in a different way, almost inert. The natural energy here ran slow and deep like cold groundwater. He could tap it, which was good, but it flowed reluctantly, like the world wasn't used to being asked. He pulled up a mental map of what he knew from the soldiers' behavior, the direction they'd come from, the road markers he'd passed through the trees. They'd come from the east. There were more of them east, he could feel the body heat of a larger encampment maybe 3 kilometers away. And the village sat on a road that connected, if the ruts were anything to judge by, to something bigger. A trade route. Which meant other villages like this one up and down its length. He straightened up, rolled his neck, and looked at the sky. Gray and low, threatening rain. He'd been in this world for maybe an hour and he'd already gotten into a fight and told soldiers to announce his name to their lord. Subtle as always, Kurama said dryly, and Naruto felt the old warmth of the fox's amusement, that grumbling, reluctant thing it had become. I wasn't trying to be subtle. Clearly. So what's the plan? Naruto thought about it for a moment. The soldiers had red cloaks. They moved like men who had authority behind them, the casual cruelty of people operating inside a sanctioned system. That meant whoever was above them had signed off on this. Which meant the system itself was the problem, not just these 8 men. In his experience, when the system was the problem, you either tore it out by the root or you found a way to make the system change itself. He didn't know enough about this world to start tearing. But he could absolutely make the people who ran this system sit down and listen. He just needed to do it everywhere at once. He took a breath, let his chakra settle into its working rhythm, that deep, oceanic pulse that came when Kurama and he breathed together, the reserve that had once been enough to fight 5 Kage-level threats simultaneously and still have something left over. Shadow clone jutsu, he said quietly, and the world split. Not 50 clones. Not 100. 10,000. The field behind the village turned white for a moment, a wall of orange and black figures resolving out of smoke, standing shoulder to shoulder in rows that stretched back past the tree line. The sound it made was a low, compressed tone that rattled the sep's cracked bell into ringing once, faintly, almost like an accident. The small boy who had been holding his own face together pressed even harder. Naruto turned to the 10,000 copies of himself and felt the familiar vertigo of that many simultaneous awarenesses, 10,000 sets of eyes, 10,000 beating hearts that were his heart, 10,000 minds that were extensions of his own. He'd gotten better at managing it over the years. You learn to let it be peripheral, background hum, like a city heard from a rooftop. Okay, he said to them, and to himself, because that was always the strange intimacy of the shadow clone jutsu. Here's what we're doing. He didn't need to brief them. They already knew. That was the point. They moved. 10,000 shadow clones of Naruto Uzumaki stepped out of that nameless village in the reach in every direction simultaneously, each carrying specific memories, specific faces to find, specific purposes. Some went east toward the Lannister encampment. Some went north. Some ran at speeds that would have looked, to anyone watching from a parapet or a tower window, like orange and white blurs against the morning dark, too fast to track, too numerous to count, moving with the soundless, coordinated certainty of a flood. The real Naruto stayed behind in the village and helped an old woman load a cart. Where are they going? She asked, watching the clones disappear down every road. Everywhere, he said. She looked at him with those flour-dusted hands folded against her stomach and something moved across her face, not trust, not yet, because she was a woman who had learned that trust cost things she couldn't always afford. But something close to it. The beginning of the question. Why? She asked. He picked up a crate of her belongings and settled it in the cart. Because nobody should have to run from their own house, he said. And I'm tired of it being a normal thing. She looked at him for a long moment, then went back to loading without another word. But her hands had steadied. That was enough, for now. The encampment 3 kilometers east was called, by the men inside it, Ser Adam's camp, after the knight who commanded it, Ser Adam Marbrand, a capable soldier with a solid reputation among the Lannister bannermen and a genuine belief that he was doing what the situation required. He'd been told to strip the reach of resources ahead of the main Lannister advance, which was a military order with a military logic, and he executed it with the brisk competence of a man who had learned not to look too carefully at the human cost of competence. He was eating breakfast when the first clone arrived. It came through the camp entrance at a walk, which the sentries technically should have stopped but didn't, in the way that guards sometimes fail to act when something is so completely outside their experience that their brains lag behind their reflexes. It was a young man in a white coat, walking through a Lannister military encampment like it was his own kitchen, and by the time the first sentry got his spear up, there were 4 more clones behind the first, and then 12 coming over the palisade wall on both sides without ropes or ladders, landing with light thuds that shouldn't have been possible from that height. And then 40 more. Ser Adam came out of his tent with his sword in his hand and stopped dead. The clones had spread through the camp. Every tent entrance had one standing outside it. The 2 soldiers manning the gate were standing very still because a clone was standing directly between them, one hand on each of their shoulders, in a posture that was weirdly comfortable given the circumstances. 2 more were sitting on the supply wagon, apparently doing nothing at all. "Good morning," said the clone nearest Ser Adam. It smiled, that wide, slightly asymmetrical smile. "You're Ser Adam Marbrand?" Adam stared. "I am." "Great. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I've got some news for you." "There are," Adam counted rapidly. There are at least 50 of you. 63 in this camp specifically. The others are handling different camps. The clone tilted its head. I've got about 900 in the reach right now, actually. Give or take. Moving through every Lannister camp between here and Ashford. Adam's hand tightened on his sword. Who sent you? Is this some Tyrell? Nobody sent me, the clone said pleasantly. I sent myself. And I'm not here to fight you, so you can put the sword down. I already took 6 of those off your men this morning and I'm tired of the clanging. You think you can walk into a military encampment of 200 men and, I didn't walk in, said the clone. I walked in and then also came over the wall in 14 places at once. It paused. The distinction matters for what I'm about to tell you. Adam looked around. His men were watching him, waiting, hands on weapons, tense with the specific tension of soldiers who didn't know what to do because what was happening wasn't in any manual they'd ever read. Say your piece, Adam said finally, because he was a practical man. The villages in this area are done being raided, the clone said. Not because Lord Tywin decided to be merciful. Because I decided they're under my protection. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, so your men don't ride out there and get embarrassed. The smile again, easy and unbothered. I'd also like you to send a message to Lord Tywin. Tell him Naruto Uzumaki wants to talk. No soldiers, no army, no throne room theatrics. Just a conversation. Can you do that? The silence in the camp had gone from tense to something stranger, a dozen different interpretations of what was happening all happening at once in different men's heads, none of them settling on an answer. Adam opened his mouth. A horn blew from the camp's north wall, and then every clone in the camp turned its head toward the sound simultaneously, 63 pairs of blue eyes moving as one, which was the moment that broke the last of the camp's composure. Men flinched. A horse pulled against its rope. Someone dropped a bowl. Tell him, the clone said. Far to the north, at Harrenhal, it was still dark. The fortress rose out of the night like a scar, 5 towers melted half to ruin by the breath of Balerion the Black Dread centuries ago, still enormous even in their deformity. It housed, at this particular moment in Westerosi history, Lord Tywin Lannister, the most powerful man in the realm and the man most confident in that assessment. He was awake at the 4th hour of the morning, which was his habit, reviewing supply chains by candlelight with the focused intensity of a man who had long since stopped needing the world's approval to feel good about himself. His 2 guards stood at the door. A raven had come in an hour ago with nothing important. His wine was untouched, he'd found he was less sharp when he drank and he had no patience for being less sharp. He heard the commotion in the courtyard 40 minutes before anyone thought to tell him about it, because the commotion was the kind that built, starting with a shout, then a cluster of shouts, then the sound of boots running in the specific pattern that meant someone was trying to reach someone quickly with urgent news. He was already standing when his guard opened the door. My lord, I heard it, Tywin said. What is it? The guard, a steady man, not prone to excitement, had an expression on his face that Tywin had not seen before. It was the expression of someone who had received information they did not yet have a category for. There are men in the courtyard, my lord. Dozens of them. They came over the walls. They haven't attacked anyone. They're just standing there. Tywin stared at him. They came over the walls. Yes, my lord. And the garrison? The garrison has them outnumbered 6-1 and they're still just standing there, my lord. One of them is asking to speak to you. Tywin picked up his gloves. Put them on with the measured pace of a man who refused to be rushed by anything, including impossibilities. One of them. One. The others are. The guard hesitated. The others are standing in various positions around the yard. On the walls. On the roof of the stables, 2 of them. One is apparently sitting in your chair in the great hall, my lord, which the captain thought you should, yes, Tywin said, and walked to the door. The courtyard of Harrenhal had 300 men in it, his garrison, weapons out, torches lit against the pre-dawn dark, forming a ring around the center of the yard. In the center of the yard stood approximately 30 figures in identical white coats. They stood with easy, relaxed postures, not touching weapons they didn't have, just waiting. The firelight caught the red trim of their coats and the yellow of their hair. Tywin Lannister walked down the steps and the garrison parted for him without being told. He stopped 6 feet from the nearest figure. The figure turned and looked at him with blue eyes and a pair of lines across each cheek that he initially took for scars before deciding they were too symmetrical. "You're Lord Tywin," the clone said. Not a question. "I am," Tywin said. His voice was level. "You are trespassing in my fortress with what appears to be a private army." "Not an army," the clone said. "And they're not private. They're me." It glanced around at the other figures. "All of them." "One guy, lots of copies." "It's a thing I can do." Tywin stared at him. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I came to Westeros about 3 hours ago, your time, and in those 3 hours I've sent versions of myself to every major castle in the realm with the same message." The clone looked at Tywin with an expression that was respectful in a foundational way, not the deference of someone lower ranked, but the respect you might give a smart opponent. "I want the raiding of villages to stop. I want the war to pause long enough for people to eat. I'm asking you first, because from what I can tell you're the one whose decisions have the most weight." "You're asking me," Tywin said softly. "I'm telling you, actually," the clone said, and though the tone didn't change, something behind the words shifted, that undertow, that depth. "I'm asking as a courtesy. The telling is what happens if the courtesy gets ignored." Tywin looked at the figures around the courtyard. At the one on the stable roof. At the 2 he could now see standing on the parapet above the gate, silhouetted against the lightning sky. At his garrison of 300 trained soldiers standing with weapons drawn, doing absolutely nothing, because what could you do when the enemy was in 20 places at once and hadn't thrown a single punch? He was not a man who frightened easily. He was not a man who had ever been told something and been unable to immediately begin calculating how to dismantle it. But right now, in this pre-dawn courtyard, with identical blue eyes watching him from every rooftop, he was calculating and not getting an answer, and that specific sensation, was something new. "I'll consider what you've said," Tywin said. "That's not a yes." "No," Tywin agreed. "It isn't." The clone looked at him for a moment. Then it nodded, like this response had been expected and filed appropriately. "Okay. I'll come back." It glanced toward the great hall. "Oh, and the one sitting in your chair in there, he's already gone. Didn't touch anything." A pause. "The wine in there smells terrible, by the way. How do you drink that?" And then every clone in the courtyard was gone, not running, not dispersing through gates, just gone, a simultaneous dispersal, each one releasing in a small white smoke pop until the courtyard was full of garrison soldiers and nothing else. The smoke drifted upward in the torchlight. Tywin stood in the silence and looked at the space where they had been, and the expression on his face was the one he wore when he'd encountered a problem he couldn't immediately measure. He didn't like it. 3,000 kilometers to the north, the wall rose out of the dark in a mass of ice so old and so cold it seemed to generate its own weather. The castle of Castle Black huddled at its base like a dog at the foot of a sleeping giant, all wooden buildings and torchlight and the smell of unwashed men and old wool. Jon Snow was on the top of the wall. He came up here when he needed to think, which was often, because thinking was harder inside where there were always voices and duties and the specific weight of a night's watch that was trying to hold a frontier against something that most of the realm had decided was a fairy story. Up here there was just wind and stars, when the clouds broke, which they had tonight, and the vast black of the forest to the north. He'd been up here for an hour when the clone found him. It came up the elevator, the massive winch cage that hauled men to the top, and Jon heard it before he saw it, the mechanical complaint of the lift. He turned with his hand on Longclaw's hilt and found a young man in a white coat stepping off the cage platform with an expression of mild curiosity directed at the wall itself. This thing is incredible, the clone said, without looking at John, running one hand along the surface of the ice. How old is it? John kept his hand on his sword. 8,000 years. Some say 8,000. The clone looked genuinely impressed. And it's still standing. So far. The clone turned and looked at him then, and John saw the blue eyes and the whisker marks and the easy, unguarded quality of the expression, not a soldier's face, or a lord's face, or the face of anyone John could immediately categorize. Jon Snow? The clone asked. John was quiet for a moment. You know my name. I know a lot of names tonight. I've been busy. The clone came a few steps closer, looked north over the edge of the wall at the black tree line below. Something's out there, it said, and it wasn't a question. John's hand stayed on his sword. The White Walkers. The dead. Most people south of here have convinced themselves it's a legend. It's not, the clone said. John looked at him. No. It's not. I can feel it, the clone said, and there was something in the voice that changed, not fear, because fear wasn't in it, but a kind of clear-eyed recognition. Like a cold spot in the chakra. The natural energy here just stops at a certain point north. Goes quiet. It paused. What kills them? John stared. Then, very slowly, his hand came off Longclaw's hilt. Dragonglass. Valyrian steel. How much dragonglass do you have? Not enough. Not nearly. John stopped. Studied the figure in front of him. Why are you asking me this? Because it sounds like the most important problem, the clone said. Bigger than any of the lords fighting over a chair to the south. It turned from the view and looked at John with an expression that was simple and direct. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm from somewhere else, another world, I think. I got here about 4 hours ago and I've spent most of that time delivering a message to people who needed to hear it. What message? Stop killing each other long enough to deal with what's actually coming. The clone glanced north again. I'm right about it coming, aren't I? John was quiet for a long moment. The wind off the top of the wall was always bitter, and it moved his cloak and pushed at the edges of the flame in the torchskins nearby, and neither of them looked cold. You're right, John said. The clone nodded. Then whatever else is going on with thrones and wars, and it waved a hand in a vague southerly gesture, that's secondary. You understand that? I've been saying it for years, John said, with a dryness that carried about 3 years of frustration in it. The clone smiled, that wide, unself-conscious smile. Yeah. I figured you had. It reached into the coat and produced a small piece of paper, a list of names, John could see. I want to come back and talk to you properly. The real me, not this. This is a copy, I'll explain later, it's easier to show than tell, but it'll be a day or two before I'm done with the South. Can you wait? John looked at the list. Looked at the figure before him. Looked north. I've been waiting for 3 years, John said. A day or two is nothing. The clone grinned, full and wide. See, that's the attitude. It stepped back toward the elevator. Get more dragonglass. Whatever it takes. We have a mine, John said. Dragonstone. We don't control it. Yet, the clone said. It pulled the elevator lever, and the cage began its descent, and John stood at the top of the wall watching it go with an expression he hadn't worn in years, not hope exactly, because hope had been a thing he'd learned to be careful with, but the neighbor of hope. The thing that lives next door and shares a wall. The sun was beginning to come up. Not just over Castle Black, over all of Westeros simultaneously, that slow grey brightening that moved from east to west, hitting the towers of the Eyrie in the Vale, spreading across the fields of the Riverlands, catching the red walls of the Twins, touching the spires of King's Landing where the Red Keep sat above the city like a crown above a brow. In the Red Keep, in her chambers, Cersei Lannister stood at the window and looked at the dawn and felt the cold moving through her that had nothing to do with temperature. She had received the clone's message. She had listened to its words, calm, clear, utterly without threat in tone but radiating something beneath the tone that her body understood even when her mind was still cataloging it. She had dismissed it from her chambers without a word, which she knew the clone had expected, because nothing in its expression had changed. And then she had stood at this window for a long time. She was not afraid of it. She refused to be afraid of it. She was afraid of what it meant, not the power, because power could be managed, could be redirected, could be made useful to her ends. She was afraid of the simplicity of it. Men who wanted things, the throne, gold, land, legacy, could be navigated. You found what they wanted and you either gave it or took it away and watched them move accordingly. This Naruto Uzumaki, according to the clone's own words, wanted nothing but peace. He wanted nothing for himself. And that made him, in Cersei's experience of the world, the most dangerous kind of man there was, not because she couldn't understand what moved him, but because she couldn't find the handle. How do you work with someone who has no price? She turned from the window and went to her desk and began to write. In Robb Stark's war camp, somewhere in the Riverlands, the clone had arrived in the commander's tent and found Robb already armed, warned by the commotion outside, and the clone had spent 15 minutes talking to a young king who was trying very hard not to show how unsettled he was by a stranger appearing in his tent surrounded by 20 copies of himself. Robb was good. He was honest and he was sharp and he was burning with the specific fury of someone who had been winning a war and then had it rendered suddenly, confusingly beside the point. He wanted justice for his father. He wanted the North free. He had given everything he had for both of those things. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, the clone had told him. I'm saying there's something coming that makes all of it matter less. And the best way to protect the North is to still have the North standing when it gets here. And who decides when the North is protected? Robb had asked, and it was a good question, the question of a king who had learned what it cost to let other people make that determination. You do, the clone had said. I'm not here to rule anything. I'm not interested in your throne or any throne. I'm here because I don't know how to walk past people hurting each other. Robb had stared at him with those gray Stark eyes and said nothing for a long time. Give me a week, he'd finally said. You have it, the clone had said. South, east, west, in every great hall and war camp and throne room, the morning came in with the same quiet revolution, lords who had gone to bed the previous night in a world they understood waking to discover that the world had been quietly, comprehensively informed that something new had arrived and it had strong opinions about what happened next. Catelyn Stark wept when the clone appeared in her room, not from fear but from something the clone said to her quietly that none of the guards outside could hear. The clone sat with her for 20 minutes before it left. In the Eyrie, Robin Arryn was still sleeping and his mother Lisa barred the door and screamed at the clone through the oak, and the clone waited patiently outside and eventually went away. At Storm's End, Stannis Baratheon looked at the clone for 30 seconds, said, "Leave," and the clone said, "Think about it," and left. At the Twins, Lord Walder Frey did not receive the clone at all because his steward made the mistake of telling it Lord Frey was unavailable. The clone had smiled at the steward, said, "Tell him Naruto Uzumaki came calling, and he'll want to think very carefully about whether he gets a second chance," and left. This was the message the steward delivered, exactly as given, to Lord Walder Frey, who sat in his high seat in the great hall and chewed at his lip and said nothing for a very long time. In Dragonstone, empty now of Stannis and his fleet, the clone walked through echoing halls and felt the old stone cold under its feet. It found the map room. It found the carved Westeros table, that enormous relief map, every castle and road picked out in loving detail, and it stood there for a while, looking at the whole of this strange continent, letting the knowledge the clones were accumulating filter back through the hive of awarenesses. Wars. Pretenders. A winter coming that nobody south of the wall would admit was the last one. A dead army moving through forest nobody could see. And somewhere across an ocean, a girl with silver hair and 3 dragons who didn't know yet what she was coming home to. This is a mess, Kurama observed, dry as old bone. Yeah, Naruto thought. Are you sure you want to fix it? He thought about the old woman with the flower on her hands. The small boy holding his own face together. The fear that lived in the grooves of their expressions like water in carved stone, patient, structural, permanent. I'm sure I want to try, he said. He touched the surface of the carved map, ran one finger along the length of the wall, and thought about Jon Snow standing up there in the wind, hand finally off his sword, looking at him with that neighbor of hope expression. The sun was fully up now. Across Westeros, the smoke from 10,000 dispersed shadow clones was drifting upward from courtyard and battlements and village road, catching the morning light, rising in thin white columns that looked, from a distance, like the world exhaling. The real Naruto Uzumaki was sitting on a fence post in a nameless village in the Reach, eating an apple he'd found in someone's abandoned kitchen, watching the last of the villagers finish loading their cart. The old woman paused beside him as she took the cart's lead rope. Will it really stop? She asked. She wasn't asking about the raid. She was asking about everything. He looked at her. I'm going to do everything I can, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, a small, private nod, the kind you give something you're not ready to say out loud yet, and led her cart down the road toward Tumbleton. Naruto watched her go, then looked east, toward the first of 1,000 conversations waiting for him. He cracked his knuckles. All right, he said to no one and everyone. Let's get to work. Chapter 2, The Night of 1,000 Shadows. The morning after was loud. Not in the way battles were loud, not the clash of steel and the shouting of orders and the wet, terrible sounds that came after. It was loud in the way that news was loud, the way a single stone dropped in still water sends rings outward until they're touching every shore. Riders left every castle before the dew burned off the grass. Ravens launched from every rookery. Men who hadn't spoken in months sent urgent messages to men they half-hated because this, whatever this was, had overridden the usual rules of who was talking to whom. Naruto spent the morning walking the Reach. Not running, not moving at combat speed, just walking, through the slow green country with its hedgerows and its sheep and its villages spaced along the roads like beads on a string. He let the clone memories settle into him as they dispersed, which was always an odd sensation, hundreds of awarenesses collapsing back into one, each bringing its cargo of faces and words and the specific texture of rooms he'd never personally entered. He sorted through them the way you'd sort through letters after a long time away from home. Tywin's face. That cold, measuring stillness, the look of a man who'd just added an unpredictable variable to a calculation he thought was finished. Robb Stark, jaw tight, gray eyes moving between the clones in his tent like he was counting them to confirm they were real. The fury he was working to manage. The intelligence beneath the fury that was already, even then, trying to figure out what this meant for the North. Jon on the wall. Jon was the one that stuck. There was something about him, that particular flavor of loneliness that came not from being unloved but from being right about something nobody else could see. Naruto knew that feeling the way you knew the smell of your own childhood home. He ate lunch in a village that still had its food, which meant his clones had gotten there first. The woman who gave him bread looked at him like he might evaporate if she looked away. He was halfway through the bread when a rider came up the road from the east, moving fast, and pulled up sharply when he saw Naruto sitting on a barrel outside the inn. The rider was a young man, 15 maybe, wearing Lannister colors under a layer of road dust. He was breathing hard and his horse was blowing. He stared at Naruto. You, the boy said. Naruto took a bite of bread. Probably. Are you Naruto Uzumaki? Yeah. The boy reached into his saddlebag with trembling hands and produced a sealed letter. From Ser Adam Marbrand. He said. The boy swallowed. He said to give this to you and then ride away very quickly. Naruto took the letter. Opened it. Read it. It was short, which he respected. Ser Adam's handwriting was clear and soldier practical, no flourishes. To Naruto Uzumaki, I have sent your message to Lord Tywin as requested. I have also sent a second message of my own, which is this: whatever you are, I believe you could have killed every man in this camp this morning and chose not to. That is either mercy or strategy. Either way, I will stop the raiding in this sector until I receive orders to the contrary. I make no other promises. Marbrand Naruto folded the letter and put it in his coat pocket. Tell Sir Adam thank you, he said to the boy. And that he's a good man. The boy stared at him. You can go, Naruto said. The boy went. Fast, as instructed. The afternoon found him on the road to King's Landing. He hadn't been to the capital yet, the real him, in person. The clones had been to the Red Keep, had delivered the message to Cersei and her assembled court, but he hadn't laid eyes on it himself. He walked at a comfortable pace and let the road tell him things. The traffic on it, the quality of it, the faces of the people moving in both directions. Plenty of people were moving north to south, refugees from the Riverlands, mostly, the walked-out look of people who'd been moving too long. He stopped and talked to groups of them when they didn't scatter at his approach. Most of them had the same story in different clothes. Soldiers came. Took things. Sometimes worse than taking things. He listened to all of it. He didn't rush them or shift impatiently or look like he was waiting for the useful parts. He just listened, and the listening seemed to mean something to people who weren't used to being listened to. A girl of maybe 12 with a younger brother on her back, literally on her back, the boy sleeping with his face against her neck, told him that their village had been burned 3 weeks ago by men in black and gold. She said it with the flat effect of someone who had already used up the emotional register for it and was now just storing the fact. Naruto looked at the sleeping boy. At the dust on the girl's boots that went up past her ankle, which meant she'd been walking through water at some point in the last day or two. At her hands, which were 12-year-old hands with calluses on them that 12-year-old hands shouldn't have. Where are you going? He asked. South, she said. My mother's sister is in King's Landing. You know where she lives? No. He thought for a moment. Reached inside his coat and wrote something on a piece of paper, an address he'd noted during the clone's visit to the capital, a sept that was feeding refugees just inside the Gate of the Gods. He handed it to her. There are people there who can help you find her, he said. And if they can't, they'll at least give you and your brother something to eat while you look. The girl looked at the paper, then at him, then at the paper again. Something in her face was working between suspicion and an exhaustion too deep to maintain the suspicion. You're the one everyone's talking about, she said. He nodded. They say you're going to fix it. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to try, he said, and it was the same thing he told the old woman in the village that morning, but this time it landed differently, heavier, because this was a 12-year-old with her brother asleep on her back, and try was a thin word for what she needed. She seemed to know that, because she just put the paper in her dress pocket and kept walking. He watched her go for longer than he needed to. Then he turned back to the road. King's Landing hit him about 2 hours before he reached it. The smell first, even at distance the city had a smell, smoke and refuse and the river and underneath it all the dense, yeasty warmth of too many humans in too small a space. Then the noise, a low constant presence in the air. Then the visual, the walls, enormous and crenellated, and above them the towers of the Red Keep rising like a crown, Aegon's high hill giving it height enough to see for miles. He stood at the city gates and looked up and thought about nothing in particular for a moment. The gate guards watched him come. They'd been watching him since he crested the last hill, and there had been some rapid conversation and some pointing and someone had gone for a sergeant. The sergeant was now standing at the gate with 8 men arrayed behind him, which was probably more men than the gate normally had and represented someone's nervous decision-making. Name and business, the sergeant said. Naruto Uzumaki. I came to talk to your queen. Do you have? She's expecting me, Naruto said. You can check. The sergeant looked at him for a moment, then looked over his shoulder and made a small gesture, and a runner went at speed through the gate into the city. Naruto stood and waited with his hands in his pockets and watched the people moving in and out of the gate around him, the flow of a city's daily life, undeterred by 8 nervous guards and 1 unusual visitor. The runner came back. He whispered in the sergeant's ear. The sergeant's expression underwent a complex private journey and arrived at a place of careful blankness. "You may pass," he said. Naruto nodded. "Thanks." He walked into King's Landing. The Red Keep's throne room was a room designed to make you feel small, and it did this with the commitment of a room that had been at it for a very long time. The ceiling was high enough to make the air feel thin. The walls were covered in the remnants of Targaryen martial history, chains, old weapons, the dim suggestion of faded paint. And at the far end, the Iron Throne itself, that deliberate atrocity of swords welded together, blades jutting in every direction from a chair so aggressively uncomfortable it seemed to have been designed as a statement about power rather than an actual seat. Cersei was not on the throne. She was standing in front of it, which Naruto found interesting. She was wearing green, her hair coiled and pinned with the practiced artlessness of a woman who had made a calculation about how she appeared and then pretended not to have. She was flanked by 2 Kingsguard knights and a small council arrangement of advisors, various older men with the posture of people who had learned to be very still in the presence of this particular woman. And she was watching him come down the long walk toward her with an expression of absolute composure that had been assembled so carefully it was its own kind of tell. There was a boy at her side. Maybe 10, dark-haired, with Lannister green eyes and a face that was trying for regal and landing somewhere closer to anxious. He stood very straight, which kids that age only did when they'd been told to. "Joffrey?" Naruto said, because the clones had covered this. "King Joffrey," one of the advisors said sharply. Naruto looked at the advisor. The advisor fell quiet. "You're not what I expected," Cersei said. "What did you expect?" "A warlord," she said. "A conqueror in armor with an army behind him. The kind of man who breaks into throne rooms at dawn and delivers ultimatums." "I sent copies of myself to break into your throne room at dawn," Naruto said. "That's close." "Copies," she repeated. The word was careful in her mouth, examined before she let it out. "Shadow clones. Jutsu. I can explain the mechanics if you want." He stopped a comfortable distance from her, near enough for conversation, far enough that nobody's threat reflex fired. "But I think you're more interested in what I want than how I do what I do." "I know what you want," Cersei said. "You told my court at 3 in the morning. Very theatrical." "I meant it," Naruto said. "You want peace," she said, and she gave the word a particular texture, not dismissive, more like a scholar examining an unusual artifact. "In Westeros. In the middle of a war. In the middle of a war's the only time a ceasefire means anything." Joffrey had been watching this exchange with the expression of a boy trying to decide whether he was allowed to be frightened or whether this situation required him to be contemptuous instead. He settled on contemptuous, which Naruto expected. "You're the one who made my guards cry," Joffrey said. "None of your guards cried," Naruto said. "They were surprised." "That's different. You walked into the Red Keep without permission." "I did," Naruto agreed. "I also didn't hurt anyone, didn't take anything, and left when I said I would." He looked at Joffrey steadily. "I'm doing the same thing now." Joffrey's jaw tightened. There was something in the way the boy responded to being looked at directly, a flinch, deeply buried, that Naruto caught. He stored it, not as something to use, just as information. "You presume a great deal," Cersei said, and now her voice had warmth in it, controlled warmth, deployed warmth, but warmth. "Coming here alone, making demands of a queen." "They're not demands," Naruto said. "They're requests with a very strong implied consequence." "And what consequence is that?" Naruto tilted his head slightly. He didn't need to say "I can be in 1,000 places at once again." He didn't need to describe what he could do or demonstrate it. He just looked at her with blue eyes that had watched the Fourth Great Ninja War from inside it and waited. Cersei looked back. And for just a moment, a single, unguarded beat between one breath and the next, something genuine moved across her face. Not fear. Something older and more complicated than fear. The recognition of someone who had spent her entire life in a game that had suddenly revealed it had been played on the wrong board. Then it was gone. The composure reassembled itself seamlessly. "I will consider your request," she said. "You may stay in the city tonight. I'll have rooms prepared in the keep." Naruto blinked. "That's generous." "I know what I'm doing," Cersei said. "I know you do," Naruto said, and he smiled. "That's fine. I know what you're doing too." The silence between them had the quality of two intelligent people acknowledging they were playing the same game and choosing to play it anyway. "Dinner," she said. "In 2 hours." "Sure," Naruto said. "Can I see the city first?" She blinked, the first time her composure slipped into something that looked almost like surprise. "You want to walk the city?" "I've never been here," he said. "I want to see it." She stared at him. "I'll be back in 2 hours," he said, and turned and walked back up the long throne room toward the entrance, and the sound of his boots on the stone floor was unhurried and even, and the Kingsguard watched him go with their hands very carefully not reaching for their swords. He walked the city for 2 hours and did not think strategically about a single moment of it. He walked through Flea Bottom, the dense warren of the city's lowest district, where the streets were barely wide enough for 2 people and everything smelled of the sewer gutters that ran down the middle of them. He bought a meat pie from a street vendor and ate it while walking and didn't ask what was in it, which was the correct strategy. He watched 2 boys race each other across a rooftop. He stopped at a well where women were drawing water and listened to them talk for a few minutes about the cost of bread, the draft on the north wall of somebody's house, the ongoing mystery of what had happened to a particular street's butcher who had apparently just closed one day and not reopened. He wasn't gathering intelligence. He was just looking, because this city, with its grime and its noise and its 2,000 years of people living and dying and eating and arguing and building things, was real and alive and deserved to be seen. In the market district he watched a merchant selling cloth and thought about Ino's family, which was a thought that came without warning and brought with it the specific ache of being very far from home. He let it sit for a moment, acknowledged it, and then set it down. Not now. Later. He had a whole collection of laters waiting. Flea Bottom had walls covered in chalk markings. Children's games, mostly, but also some older marks, names of people who died in the Battle of the Blackwater, he gathered from context, scored into the plaster with a determination that had survived months of weather. He stopped and read some of them. Didn't say anything. Just read them. A small girl, maybe 7, watched him reading the wall from a doorway. "Do you know any of them?" he asked. "My dad," she said. "Third one from the top." He looked at the third name from the top. "Ben Fry." "Just the one name." "I'm sorry," he said. The girl shrugged with the fragile carelessness of a child who had learned that shrugging was safer than whatever the alternative was. Then she went back inside. He stood in front of Benfrey's name for another moment. Then he went to dinner. The dinner was a test, which Naruto knew and Cersei knew he knew, which made it almost comfortable, 2 people who understood each other's intentions, proceeding anyway. She'd placed him across from her at a table that was smaller than the throne room suggested she could have used, which meant she'd thought about the distance. Joffrey was not present. A glass of red wine had been poured for him that he moved to the side without drinking, which he saw her note. "Smart," she said. "Just don't really like wine," he said. "Is there water?" Someone appeared with water. Cersei looked at the ceiling very briefly. "Tell me about where you come from," she said. "Why?" "Because I want to understand you," she said, simply. "I find that the most effective approach to any person is to understand what they value." "So you can find the handle," Naruto said. She tilted her head, acknowledging it without admitting it. "I came from a world where people can harness energy, they call it chakra, I'll explain it sometime, and use it to do things that look like what I did this morning. He picked up his fork, looked at the food, put the fork down. Lots of villages like the ones your soldiers have been raiding. Lots of lords who thought their wars were more important than the people dying in them. I spent most of my life learning that they weren't. You were a soldier. I was a lot of things, he said. I'm a Hokage. A leader. A village leader, I guess you'd say, though it was more than that. But before all of that I was just a kid that nobody thought would amount to much. He picked the fork back up and ate something. It was good, actually. What I am doesn't change what I want here, which is simple. Peace, she said, again with that examining quality. A ceasefire. Time. Enough breathing room for the people who are surviving this war on bread and hope to get through winter. And my son's throne. There it was. The thing the whole conversation had been working toward, the real question beneath the composure and the wine and the smaller table. Not my concern, Naruto said. Cersei looked at him. I mean it, he said. I genuinely do not care who sits on that chair. I told Tywin the same thing. I told Robb Stark the same thing. He met her eyes. I care about the people who die because of the people sitting on that chair. Which is different. It is different, Cersei said slowly. And if I don't agree to your ceasefire? Then I'll do something that makes the ceasefire irrelevant, he said. Because at a certain point, the people doing the fighting need to understand that the people above them have made a choice that isn't about anything real. That it's just about the chair. He paused. Your men in the field aren't monsters. Ser Adam isn't a monster. He stopped the raids in his sector before I even asked him properly. He looked at her. Your men are following orders. If those orders stop, your men stop. Cersei stared at him with a very particular kind of intensity, the intensity of someone who is simultaneously angry at an argument and unable to find the flaw in it. You have a very simple view of a very complicated world, she said. I've heard that before, Naruto said. People said it to me for years. And every time, eventually, the complicated thing turned out to have a simple thing inside it. He ate some more. This food is really good. What is this? She blinked. Trout. Poached. We don't have this back home. The poaching part one mean. He ate another bite with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who had been walking all day and was genuinely hungry. I'm staying in the city a few days, he said. I'd like to talk to your advisors. I'd like to hear what they think the sticking points are for getting the major houses to agree on a pause. My advisors will tell you what I tell them to tell you, Cersei said. I know, he said. That's fine. I'm also going to talk to people in Flea Bottom. People in the market. People at the gate. You're going to ask common people their views on the war. Their views on the war, their views on the food supply, their views on the cost of coal before winter. He shrugged. The people who run countries usually don't ask the people living in them. It leads to misunderstandings. Cersei set her knife down. She looked at him with an expression that had moved past the examination phase into something harder to name, not respect, not yet, but the state that preceded it. The state of someone encountering a thing they cannot quickly dismiss. You're not at all what I expected, she said again, but the texture was different this time. Yeah, he said. I know. 3 days' ride northeast, in the Riverlands, in a castle called Riverrun, Catelyn Tully Stark sat in a room with high windows and thought about what the clone had said to her. It had come in at dawn, as they all had, in smoke and the strange quiet that follows an announcement. She'd had a knife in her hand when it appeared, she'd slept badly, the nightmares were worse in castles that weren't her own, and it had held its hands up and said very clearly, I'm not here to hurt you, and something in the quality of its voice had made her hold the knife rather than throw it. It had sat down. Not in a guard's posture or a supplicant's posture, just sitting, like someone joining her at a kitchen table. It had told her about Robb. About the conversation in the war tent, not giving her his exact words, because it had a sense of what was private, but enough to know it had seen him, seen the intelligence and the fury and the love of him that she kept having to remind herself was a king now, her boy who used to sit on her lap for stories. He's doing everything right, the clone had said. He's brilliant. But he's going to walk into something he can't fight his way out of. It had paused. There are people in his orbit who smile when they should be watched. I don't know yet who. But I will. She had asked, voice careful, and Bran. Rickon. Arya. The clone had been quiet for a moment. I don't know where all your children are yet, it had said honestly. But I'm looking. The honesty of it, not the promise, but the not yet, had been what broke her composure. Because everyone else who had told her about her children had been certain. Promises were easy. I don't know yet was real. She'd wept. The clone hadn't looked away or given her platitudes. It had sat and let her, which was all she'd needed from it. Now, 3 days later, she sat by the window and turned those words over. There are people in his orbit who smile when they should be watched. She thought about Walder Frey. She thought about the marriage pact and the bridge and the necessity that had felt like drowning. She thought about the smile that lived on Walder Frey's face that had always seemed to have too many teeth in it. She thought about it for a long time. Back in King's Landing, Naruto spent 3 days talking to everyone. He talked to Varys the spider in a corridor, just the two of them, by accident or by the spider's design, he couldn't tell. Varys was a round, soft-spoken man with no hair and eyes that had been watching the world for so long they'd developed a kind of affectionate cynicism about it. You know, Varys said, folding his hands, in all my years of gathering information about dangerous people, I have never encountered someone who makes themselves quite so freely available. I'm not dangerous to anyone who isn't hurting people, Naruto said. You're terrifying to everyone, Varys said, not unkindly. Because you don't want anything. A man who wants nothing cannot be bargained with or threatened. You are, from a political perspective, completely impossible. Is that a compliment? Varys smiled. It is the most sincere thing I have said in years, he said. Now, tell me what you actually know about what's coming from the north. Because I have birds everywhere, and my birds have gone quiet past a certain latitude, and I find that I care about that more than the throne and I don't entirely know what to do with that feeling. They talked for an hour. Naruto talked to Littlefinger too, briefly, in the same corridor 2 days later, and the conversation was entirely different, all surface glitter and positioned warmth, nothing solid underneath. Littlefinger wanted to know where Naruto's loyalties lay, and phrased the question 6 different ways in 6 minutes to try to get an unguarded answer. I'm loyal to whoever isn't causing unnecessary suffering, Naruto said. Which, in this city, is a short list. Littlefinger had smiled his particular smile, the one that went all the way up to his eyes and stopped. How refreshingly uncomplicated. I know, Naruto said, and walked away. He talked to the Goldcloaks at the city gate. He talked to a blacksmith in the Street of Steel who was filling a massive Lannister order for weapons and thought it would probably get him killed eventually if the Lannisters lost. He talked to a septa at the September of Baelor who had been feeding refugees for 3 months on donations that were getting smaller, and she told him what kind of numbers she was dealing with and he did math in his head and then made a decision he hadn't fully planned on making. He went back to Cersei. The September of Baelor, he said, without preamble. The septa there, she needs 1,000 gold dragons. Cersei looked up from her letters. You want me to give a septa? She's feeding 2,000 refugees from the Riverlands War. People your army displaced. He sat down across from her without being invited, which he'd been doing for 3 days and which she had stopped remarking on. It costs roughly 160 dragons a week. She has 20 left. If you want to talk about peace and good faith in the same conversation, the easiest thing you can do today is make sure 2,000 people don't starve in your city. Cersei stared at him. I'm not asking for me, he said. I'm telling you because you're in a position to actually do it. A long pause. She looked at the letter she'd been writing. Set it aside. Picked up another piece of parchment and wrote something, signed it, pressed her seal to it, and held it out without looking at him. He took it. Don't make it seem like I'm becoming predictable, she said. I wouldn't dream of it, he said, and pocketed the letter. He was halfway to the door when she said, behind him, my son Tommen. He's 8. Her voice had changed, the armor under the armor, the thing she protected even more carefully than the throne. He wants to meet you. Naruto paused in the doorway. I'd like that, he said. He spent an afternoon with Tommen in a garden, teaching him how to do a very basic chakra exercise that he described as a breathing game, and the boy was gentle and genuinely curious and made Naruto think about the kind of person he might become if the world around him could be persuaded to stop being such a relentless teacher of the wrong lessons. On the morning of the 4th day, a raven arrived from Robb Stark's camp. Naruto was on the keep's roof. He'd taken to coming up here in the mornings, the height giving him a clean view over the bay, when one of Varys's little birds, a girl of perhaps 9 who he'd been told carried messages for the spider, came up the stairs and handed him a folded piece of paper with the handwriting of a young man in a hurry. To Naruto Uzumaki, I've consulted with my bannermen. Most of them think you're either a god or a spy, neither of which I believe. One of them suggested you might be a faceless man, which I also don't believe, because faceless men don't announce themselves. I'll meet you in Riverrun, 3 days hence, if you can make that happen without riding through country that will try to kill you. Robb Stark, king in the North. P.S., my mother says you sat with her. Whatever you said to her, it was the right thing. I don't forget debts. Naruto read it twice. The postscript sat warmly. He looked out over King's Landing from the roof, the sprawl of it, the bay, the ships, the distant line of smoke from Flea Bottom's cook fires rising into the pale morning sky. 4 days. He'd been in Westeros 4 days, and he'd been in every great castle and spoken to every lord of consequence and stood in this strange city that smelled of river and ambition and figured out enough of its geography to have a working map in his head. The clone memories had given him language patterns, the way these people spoke, the formal registers, the specific vocabulary of power in this place. He'd learned the names that mattered and the names that mattered more than the people using them. He'd done more in 4 days here than he'd sometimes managed in 4 months of Hokage negotiations. The difference was that Hokage negotiations required him to be careful, to move through established channels and respect the rules of the game. Here he didn't know the rules of the game, which meant he was playing the way he'd always played before he learned he was supposed to play differently. Which was to say, straight ahead, loud enough to be heard, honest enough to be trusted, and fast enough that the people who wanted to stop him couldn't get organized. He sent a reply to Robb. 3 days. I'll be there. And you don't owe me anything, I sat with your mother because she needed someone to sit with her. That's all. He sent a second message north. Just a few lines for Jon Snow, coming to the wall after Riverrun. Start counting the dragonglass. And then, because he thought Jon was the kind of person who needed someone to occasionally say the obvious thing out loud, you're not wrong about what's coming. You've never been wrong about it. He sent a third message to Tywin, which was shorter than the others. I'll be at Harrenhal in 10 days. I expect a real answer this time. You're smart enough to have one. He looked at the city one more time. Somewhere in it, a 12-year-old girl was looking for her aunt with a piece of paper from a stranger in her pocket. Somewhere in it, Tommen was probably practicing the breathing exercise in his garden. Somewhere in it, Cersei was sitting with a letter she'd written and not yet decided whether to send. Somewhere further south, across an ocean, 3 dragons were sleeping in the dark. He'd get there eventually. He rolled his neck, loosened his shoulders, and thought about a nameless village in the Reach and the distance it had taken to get from there to here in 4 days. He thought about how much distance was left. Then he stepped off the roof of the Red Keep. The guards at the wall beneath him spun at the sound, a short rush of wind, the impression of something moving very fast past them. By the time they looked up and down and confirmed that nobody was falling, the road outside the city gate already had a figure on it, white coat bright in the morning, moving north at a pace that wasn't quite running but covered ground at a speed that running couldn't match. The figure shrank into the distance, became a point of color against the road, and then was gone over the hill. A guard looked at his colleague. His colleague looked back. "7 hells," said the guard. "Yeah," said his colleague. Chapter 3, The dwarf and the demon. Tyrion Lannister arrived at Riverrun on a horse that was too large for him and alone, which was the most dangerous thing he'd done in recent memory, and he'd recently survived a battle, a trial, and his father's company at dinner. He'd told no one where he was going. He'd left a note for Bronn that said gone to do something stupid, back in a week, don't tell my father, which Bronn would read and then tell his father anyway, but the delay would be useful. He'd taken a single bag, enough coin for the road, and the specific resolution of a man who had decided that the most interesting thing in the world was currently in a castle 3 days' ride away and he was going to go look at it. He'd heard the reports. Everyone had heard the reports. The morning after the clones had swept through every great house, Westeros had entered what Tyrion thought of as its collective argument phase, the stage where everyone had something happen to them that they didn't understand, and instead of admitting that, they all argued loudly about what it meant. His father thought it was an elaborate deception. The Tyrells thought it was a Lannister trick. Robb Stark's bannermen were split between send an army and send a maester and had settled on sending neither while they argued. Cersei had gone quiet, which was more frightening than anything she could have said. And Joffrey had decreed that Naruto Uzumaki was to be arrested on sight, which was the kind of decree that demonstrated a perfect, crystalline ignorance of the situation. Tyrion had listened to all of this and felt a growing certainty that everyone was asking the wrong question. They were all asking what does he want? The smarter ones were asking how do we stop him? Nobody, as far as Tyrion could tell, was asking the question that actually mattered, is he right? So he'd gotten on his horse. Riverrun was a proper castle, the Tully seat, triangular, with the Red Fork and Tumblestone rivers running along 2 sides so that the whole structure looked like it was being carried by water. Tyrion arrived at dusk and was stopped at the outer gate by Tully men who looked at him the way everyone looked at him, which was with the mixture of recognition and contempt he'd long since metabolized into something he barely noticed. "Tyrion Lannister," he said, before they could ask. I know. Hold your horses. I'm here to speak with Naruto Uzumaki." The guards exchanged a look. "He's expecting you," one asked. "Nobody told him I was coming," Tyrion said. "But I have a feeling he won't be surprised." He was right. He was brought through the castle to a courtyard where Naruto was sitting on a low wall with Robb Stark, of all people, the two of them deep in conversation, Robb with his direwolf grey wine stretched at his feet like a grey rug. Tyrion stopped in the archway and took them in, the young king who'd been winning a war with his brilliant generalship and no ceiling, and the whatever he was in the white coat who had apparently decided to make all of that irrelevant. Naruto looked up. And here was the thing about those eyes, Tyrion had heard the descriptions, had mentally filed them under dramatic exaggeration, and was now revising his position. They were just eyes, technically speaking. Blue, ordinary in shape, with those strange marks bracketing them. But there was a quality of attention in them that Tyrion, who prided himself on reading people, found immediately off-center. Like being looked at by someone who had already skipped the part where they decided whether you were worth looking at. "Tyrion Lannister," Naruto said. Not surprised. Not unwelcoming. "In the flesh," Tyrion said, "which there is less of than you might expect." He walked into the courtyard. Grey Wind raised his massive head and stared at him. Tyrion looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at Tyrion. Neither of them did anything stupid. "I've come a long way to ask you some questions. I'd appreciate it if you didn't have your large friend eat me first." "Grey Wind doesn't eat anyone who doesn't smell like a threat," Robb said. "Wonderful," Tyrion said. "I've been told I smell like a moderate inconvenience at worst." Naruto laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, and it did something to the atmosphere of the courtyard that Tyrion couldn't immediately name. Robb Stark blinked and then almost smiled, which was probably the most visible he'd been since he became a king. Sit down, Naruto said, gesturing at the wall. Rob, you mind if we talk? Rob looked at Tyrion with the expression of a man who had strong and reasonable objections and had decided to set them aside temporarily. A Lannister in Riverrun, he said. My grandfather would rise from his grave. Your grandfather sounds like he'd be bad at this conversation, Tyrion said, and sat on the wall at a polite distance from Naruto. I'm not here as a Lannister. I'm here as someone who read the reports and thought every single person I know interpreted them incorrectly. How'd they interpret them? Naruto asked. As a threat, Tyrion said. My father thinks you're the most dangerous military asset anyone has ever deployed and wants to know who deployed you. My sister thinks you're an obstacle to her plans and is already thinking around you. The Tyrells think you might be useful and are wondering how to get you to be useful to them specifically. He paused. Robb Stark's bannermen think you're terrifying and are arguing about it. And you? Naruto asked. I think, Tyrion said carefully, that you are exactly what you say you are. Which in Westeros makes you either a fool or the most original thing to happen to this continent since Aegon's dragons. Grey Wind had put his head back down. The evening was settling in, the kind of blue-gray dusk that came with clear skies and the promise of cold later, and the torches in the courtyard brackets were just becoming necessary. Robb looked between them for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. I'll give you the courtyard, he said, and stood, and snapped his fingers once for Grey Wind, who came up in one fluid motion and padded after him without a backward look. They sat in the empty courtyard and Tyrion listened to the sound of a castle doing its evening things, the kitchen noise, the changing of the watch, the distant sound of someone singing something bawdy in a lower hall. You know what I find strange? Tyrion said. Tell me. Everyone is talking about you, everyone is afraid of you or trying to use you, and yet from what I understand you spent 2 days in King's Landing walking around Flea Bottom and talking to people at Wells. He looked at Naruto with genuine curiosity. You could have taken the Red Keep. You could have put yourself on that throne if you'd wanted it. And you spent your time asking people the price of coal. The price of coal is important, Naruto said. If people can't heat their houses in winter, they die. That's more immediate than who's sitting on what chair. You realize that's genuinely not how anyone with power in this country thinks. I know, Naruto said. That's the problem. Tyrion was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. He'd had a lot of conversations in his life, he'd been told his whole life that his only weapon was his mind, which had started as an insult and become, through long application, the truest thing about him. He'd had conversations with kings and queens and murderers and merchants and whores and maesters, and he could feel in the first 30 seconds of talking to someone whether the conversation was going to mean anything. This was going to mean something. Tell me about where you come from, he said. Not the broad strokes. The real thing. Naruto looked at him sideways, and something in the look acknowledged that this was a different kind of question than the polite version Cersei had asked. It's a world where people can use chakra, he said. Energy that comes from training your body and your mind to work together in a specific way. People use it to fight, mostly, because people are people and the first thing they figured out to do with a new kind of power was hit each other with it. He paused. My village was founded by a man who believed he could use it to create lasting peace. Spent his whole life trying and died before he got there. His students spent their lives trying. It got passed down, this idea, this belief that peace was possible, was worth working toward. He looked at the torchlight. I grew up an orphan in that village. Kid with a monster sealed inside him, long story, and nobody wanted anything to do with me. I decided early on that the thing I was going to prove with my life was that my village's founder was right. That peace wasn't naive. That it was just hard. And did you? Tyrion asked. Mostly, Naruto said, with the specific honesty of someone who had lived the gap between mostly and completely. Enough that I believed it more at the end than I did at the beginning, which I guess is all you can ask. Tyrion turned that over in his mind. A monster inside you, he said. That's not metaphorical. Nine-tailed fox, Naruto said. Kurama. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, a softness that came and went. He's a partner, now. He was a weapon before. It took a long time and it went badly several times before it got there. You tamed a demon. I didn't tame anything, Naruto said, with an edge that wasn't unfriendly. Taming implies I had power over him. I understood him. That's different. Tyrion stared at him. He had the sudden, uncomfortable feeling of being a person who had spent his whole life being uncommonly intelligent and encountering someone for whom intelligence was not the primary tool. You know what my father would do with you if he could? Tyrion said. Use me, Naruto said. Yeah. He'd find your price. Everyone has one, according to him. What does he think mine is? He doesn't know yet, Tyrion said. Which is driving him absolutely mad. My father has not encountered a situation he couldn't calculate his way through in 40 years of being the most powerful man in Westeros. He reached for the wine at his belt and then stopped and looked at Naruto. You don't drink. I'll drink with you if you want company, Naruto said. I just don't drink for the sake of it. Tyrion poured himself a cup from his skin, a decent arbor red that had survived the ride in passable condition, and drank. My father, he said, is the most brilliant man I know. Brilliant and absolutely convinced that the world is a mechanism that responds to leverage. Pull the right lever and you get the right result. People are levers. History is a series of levers. He drank again. And you are not a lever, which makes you, in his worldview, not a person. An event. A weather system. Something to be endured and worked around. And what do you think? Naruto asked. Not about your father. About me. Tyrion set the cup down on the wall between them. He looked at it for a moment. I think, he said slowly, that you are what happens when someone actually believes the things everyone else only says they believe. He looked up. Peace. Protecting the innocent. The idea that common people matter as much as lords. Everyone says these things. In Westeros, saying them is practically mandatory. You say them at table and then you go back to your chambers and forget them. But you, he gestured vaguely. You walk into Flea Bottom and ask about coal. Naruto was quiet for a moment. Then, you think that's naive. I thought it was naive, Tyrion said. Present tense is more complicated. He picked up the cup again. My father is going to try to destroy you. Not kill you, he's too intelligent to try something that's obviously impossible. He'll try to make you irrelevant. Box you in, reframe the situation so your presence becomes a problem for everyone, the disruption rather than the cure. He's very good at that. I know, Naruto said. I was kind of counting on you to tell me how. Tyrion blinked. Then he laughed, a genuine one, surprised out of him. You came here to recruit me. I came here to talk to you, Naruto said. Recruiting is a strong word. I just thought, someone in this world must be smart enough and honest enough to tell me what I'm missing. Someone who knows the rules of this game from the inside and is also tired of it. He looked at Tyrion steadily. You spent how long at court watching your family play this game? All of my 36 years, Tyrion said. More or less. And how many of those years did you actually believe in what you were doing? The question landed in the silence of the courtyard like a stone dropped in still water. Tyrion looked at his wine. He thought about his years as Hand of the King, the genuine effort he'd made, the small good things he'd actually managed, lost in the larger machinery of his family's ambition. He thought about the trial. About Shay. About the crossbow. Some of them, he said quietly. Enough to make the others hurt more. Then help me, Naruto said. Not because I'll give you something. Because you're the only person I've met in 4 days here who asked the right question. Tyrion looked at him. Which question? Whether I was right, Naruto said. Everyone else asked what I wanted or how I could be stopped. You asked if I was correct. He half smiled. I think you already know the answer to that. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, the silence of two people who have just said something real and are letting it settle. What do you need? Tyrion said finally. Tell me how your father's going to move, Naruto said. Not the military stuff. The political stuff. The levers he'll pull. Tyrion thought about it. He stared into his wine like he was reading something. The phrase, he said. That's where I'd start if I were him. The phrase are the hinge that Robb Stark's campaign swings on, they control the crossing, and Robb broke an oath to them when he married Jane Westerling instead of one of their daughters. He paused. Lord Walder Frey does not forgive oaths broken. And my father doesn't need to forgive Walder Frey anything, just point him in the right direction. What direction? Tyrion was quiet for a long moment. He set the wine cup down. He was doing calculations, not the kind his father did, but a different kind, the kind that factored in things Tywin had never found worth factoring. Robb Stark has a war to fight, a political alliance to maintain, and men whose loyalty runs hot and narrow. If Walder Frey withdraws his support publicly enough of those men start looking at the larger picture and finding it bleak. He paused. And if something happened to Robb, not Walder killing him, that would be too obvious, but something happening to him while he was under Frey hospitality, he stopped. He looked up at Naruto, who was looking back at him with an expression that was very still. That's what I'd be afraid of, Naruto said quietly. You heard something, Tyrion said. My clone told Robb's mother there were people smiling when they should be watched. She took it seriously. He paused. But I don't know enough yet to know when or where. When Robb needs the phrase alliance most, Tyrion said, and there was something grim and certain in his voice. That's when. My father is patient. He'll wait until the moment when Robb is most exposed and most reliant on their goodwill. He looked at Naruto. You need to make sure Robb Stark never needs to rely on Walder Frey. How? By giving him something better, Tyrion said. The crossing isn't the only way across the Trident. It's just the most convenient one. If Robb had another route, Frey loses his leverage. He paused. And without leverage, Walder Frey is just a very unpleasant old man in a drafty castle. Naruto looked at him. You know this world. You know these families, these roads, these political knots. I do, Tyrion agreed. Then stay, Naruto said. Not as a Lannister. Just as someone who knows things I need to know. Tyrion was quiet for a long time. Outside the courtyard, the evening had fully arrived. Stars were coming out above Riverrun in the gap between the river mist, and the castle had settled into its night sounds. Somewhere in the walls above them, Robb Stark was probably sitting with his maps and his doubts, doing the same math he always did and getting the same answer that always came up short. My father will call it treason, Tyrion said. What do you call it? Tyrion picked up the wine, drank the last of it, set the cup down with a small precise movement. I call it the first genuinely interesting thing I've been offered in years. He looked at Naruto with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is examining it to see if it holds. One condition. Name it. We're honest with each other, Tyrion said. No performance. No strategy. If you think I'm wrong, you tell me. If I think you're being naive, I tell you. No politics between us. He held out his hand, small, heavy-knuckled, a dwarf's hand. I've had enough politics to last several lifetimes. Naruto looked at the hand. Then he took it. His grip was warm. Deal, he said. They sat in the courtyard until the wine was gone and the torches had burned low and the castle was mostly quiet, and they talked. Tyrion asked about the chakra system in detail and Naruto explained it without condescension, the nature of it, the two sources, physical energy and spiritual energy, the way they merged and the things you could do when they did. He demonstrated once, pressed one finger to the stone wall beside him and pushed a thread of chakra into it, and the stone cracked cleanly in a straight line from his fingertip to 6 feet away without crumbling, just split, like a book opened. Tyrion looked at the crack. "You did that with one finger," he said. "Light touch," Naruto said. 7 hells. Tyrion asked about the war, not the wars in Westeros but the one Naruto had fought in, the one that he mentioned almost parenthetically, and Naruto told him about it with the kind of honesty that comes from having processed something fully. The scale of it, the cost of it, the moment when he'd had to fight someone he loved and the moment after when he'd still been willing to look for another way. "He came around?" Tyrion asked. He'd figured out they were talking about a specific person. "Eventually," Naruto said. "It took almost dying." "His almost dying or yours?" "Both," Naruto said. "At the same time?" Tyrion stared at him. "You almost died together and that's what fixed it. We were both so busy trying to save each other that we forgot to keep fighting," Naruto said. He said it simply, like a man describing a meal, but there was something alive and deep underneath it. "There's a lesson in there. I'm still unpacking it." Naruto asked about Tywin, and this was the part Tyrion had the most to say. He talked about his father for almost an hour, not with bitterness, or not only with bitterness, but with the complicated intimate knowledge of someone who had studied a person their whole life the way you study something you need to survive. "He loves Westeros," Tyrion said. "People miss that. They see the ruthlessness and they think it's the core of him, but it's a method. The core of him is this absolute belief that the realm needs a strong hand to hold it together. That without the Lannisters, without him, everything falls apart." "Does he think about the people in it?" Naruto asked. "Not as individuals," Tyrion said. "As a mass. As the realm's population. He thinks about them the way you think about the health of an army, aggregate, statistical. How many can you feed, how many can you fight with, how many will you lose?" He paused. "He's never, in my memory, known the name of a common person who wasn't directly useful to him." "That's the difference," Naruto said quietly. "Between what?" "Between someone who wants peace because it's right and someone who wants stability because it's useful," Naruto said. "Your father wants stability. That's not the same thing." Tyrion turned that over. He thought about all the times he'd watched his father make brilliant, devastating, correct decisions and all the human cost that pooled in their wake, and the way Tywin never looked down at the pool. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The wine was long gone. The torches were guttering. Somewhere in the castle a bell rang the late hour. "He'll come for the phrase within the month," Tyrion said. "My estimate." "I'll move faster," Naruto said. "How?" "I'm going to talk to Walder Frye directly," Naruto said. Tyrion blinked. "You're going to," he stopped. Started again. "Walder Frye is one of the most vile, self-interested, petty men in the history of a continent with very stiff competition in that category." "I know," Naruto said. "He's not going to respond to honesty or good faith." "I know," Naruto said again, with perfect equanimity. "Then what are you going to say to him?" Naruto smiled, not the wide, easy smile of someone who was comfortable, but a different one, harder at the edges. "I'm going to make him more afraid of me than he is interested in whatever your father's offering." Tyrion was quiet for a moment. "That might actually work," he said, with a reluctant admiration. "Fear, he understands. People like Frye," Naruto paused, choosing words. "People like Frye have spent their whole lives in a world where they're almost powerful. Almost respected. Always needing someone more powerful to attach to because on their own, they're not quite enough." He looked at the cracked stone wall. "Your father is offering him another chance to attach to a winner. I'm going to offer him something your father can't, the option to be completely left alone by the most powerful person in the room, forever, in exchange for one simple decision." "Don't facilitate the murder of your guests," Tyrion said. Exactly. Tyrion stared at him. You make it sound straightforward. All of it is straightforward if you're willing to just say the thing, Naruto said. Most people in your world don't say the thing. They imply it, hint at it, position around it, spend years circling it. I just say it. In my experience, Tyrion said, saying the thing gets you killed. In mine, Naruto said, not saying it gets more people killed, eventually, than saying it ever could. The courtyard was fully dark now except for 2 torches, one on each side, burning in their brackets with the low, steady flame of good dry wood. The castle sounds had settled into the specific quiet of the deep night, muted, intimate. I'm going to need a raven sent to the wall, Naruto said. And another one to wherever Stannis Baratheon is. Stannis? Tyrion was surprised. Why Stannis? Because he's the most serious man in this war and the most ignored, Naruto said. He's been telling everyone the real threat is north of the wall and everyone's treated him like he's broken. He's not broken. He's just been shouting in the wrong direction. He looked at Tyrion. Get me in a room with Stannis and I think he'll listen. Stannis doesn't listen to anyone, Tyrion said. He listens to evidence, Naruto said. And I am evidence. Tyrion thought about Stannis Baratheon, his rigid, unsmiling brother-in-law by marriage to the realm's history, the man whose defining characteristic was a total refusal to bend any principle for any reason. You know what, he said. You might be right. He'd drive a lesser man to drink, a better man too, and I am neither, but there's a consistency to Stannis that is genuinely rare in this world. He told my clone to leave, Naruto said. And then what? And then thought about it for 2 days and sent a raven asking when I was coming back. Tyrion laughed again. Of course he did. He stood, feeling the age in his joints that the cold and the long ride had put there. I'll write the ravens. Both of them. He stretched. And Naruto, the Fry meeting. Take someone with you. Why? Because even if Fry is afraid of you, it helps to have a witness, Tyrion said. Someone who can report accurately what was said. Otherwise he'll claim the conversation never happened or happened differently, and half of Westeros will believe him out of spite. Naruto considered this. Who'd you have in mind? Me, Tyrion said. Naruto looked at him. I told you, Tyrion said. First genuinely interesting thing in years. The next morning Robb Stark came to breakfast and found Tyrion Lannister already at the table, eating bread and speaking rapidly to Naruto about river crossing points along the Trident, with a piece of parchment between them covered in small, precise handwriting and little sketched maps in the margins. Robb stood in the doorway with Grey Wind beside him and looked at this scene for a long time. A Lannister and the man who made my banner men cry, he said. At breakfast. Sit down, Tyrion said. Your castle is lovely, your bread is adequate, and we have a problem to solve. Robb sat. He looked at Naruto. You trust him? Yeah, Naruto said simply. Robb looked at Tyrion, who spread his hands in a gesture that acknowledged all relevant objections. I'm going to talk to Walder Frye, Naruto said. But before I do, I want to make sure you don't need him anymore. That's what we're working on. He slid the parchment across to Robb. Tyrion knows a ford about 2 days upriver from the twins. Shallow enough in late autumn, defended by nobody because nobody uses it because everyone uses the twins. Robb looked at the parchment. He was quiet for a moment. This ford is real. I crossed it 8 years ago, drunk, at night, and lived, Tyrion said. So yes. Robb looked at the marks on the parchment. Something moved through his expression, the specific recalculation of a man who had been carrying a weight and just been shown a place to set it down. He looked up at Naruto. And you'll go to the twins yourself. I'll go to the twins myself, Naruto confirmed. Alone. With your uncle Tyrion, Tyrion said. Robb opened his mouth. Yes, I know. Sit with that for a moment. Robb sat with it. If Fry, he won't, Naruto said. You don't know, I know enough about people like Fry, Naruto said. Not dismissive, certain. The certainty of someone who had stood in front of enough desperate, self-interested people to recognize the shape of them. He's not a man with principles. He's a man with calculations. The calculation I'm going to give him is going to be very simple and very final. Rob looked at him. The gray stark eyes were doing that thing they did, reading, measuring, deciding. After a moment, he nodded. Once. My mother wants to come, he said. Naruto blinked. What? She came to me this morning, Rob said. She said, he paused, and there was something in his face when he spoke of her that was a king being briefly a son. She said she's been afraid of the phrase for weeks and she wants to be there when you speak to them. As a witness. Tyrion looked at Naruto. Naruto thought about it. He thought about Caitlyn in her room with her hands in her lap and the specific quality of her fear, not for herself, he'd understood that clearly, but for Rob. The fear of a mother who had learned that loving someone wasn't enough to keep them safe. Tell her to be ready by dawn, he said. Rob nodded and rose. At the door he paused. Naruto. He turned. What you said to her. In her room, that first morning. He met Naruto's eyes. Thank you. Naruto looked back at him steadily. She needed to hear it, he said. That's all. Rob left. Gray wind padded after him. Tyrion looked at Naruto. What did you say to her? That her children were looking for home, Naruto said. That Rob was going to be okay if we moved fast enough. And that she didn't have to carry all of it alone. Tyrion was quiet for a moment. Was any of that true? The last part was true regardless, Naruto said. I don't make promises about things I don't control. He picked up a piece of bread. The first two parts, I'm going to make them true. Tyrion looked at him and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not optimism, because he was a Lannister and optimism wasn't in the bloodline. Something smaller and more durable. The sensation, faint and suspicious, of something being worth trying. He drank his wine. We leave at dawn, he said. Dawn, Naruto agreed. Outside the window the Tumblestone and Red Fork ran their courses, indifferent and constant, and the castle went about its morning, and somewhere upriver there was a ford that nobody used, and it was there and it was real and it changed things, which was exactly the kind of small practical fact that Tyrion had always believed in more than grand gestures. Sometimes the thing that saved you wasn't a sword or a speech. It was knowing where to cross. Chapter 4, Fire and Foxes. The twins stood where they always had, straddling the green fork like a man with his feet on two different shores, each castle identical to the other in the way that things built out of insecurity were identical, wanting to look like twice as much as they were. The bridge between them was wide enough for a wagon, and it was the only crossing for 30 miles in either direction, and Lord Walder Frye had built his entire sense of self around that geographic fact for the better part of 80 years. Naruto looked at it from the south bank and thought it looked exactly like every other castle he'd passed through this world, stone, cold, built to intimidate the people approaching it from the outside and imprison the people living inside it. He knows we're coming, he asked. I sent a raven 2 days ago, Tyrion said from atop his horse. Told him Naruto Uzumaki requests a meeting and that I would be accompanying him as a witness. He paused. He sent back a reply that was mostly insults with a yes buried in the middle. Sounds like he's scared, Naruto said. Walder Frye is always scared, Caitlyn said, her horse moving up beside them. She was watching the castle with an expression that had been composed for 3 days and was holding, but only just. He's been scared his whole life. It's what makes him dangerous. Scared people and dangerous people, Naruto said. Usually the same people. The gate was open. The courtyard inside was full of Frye men, not threatening exactly, not a battle formation, just present, the way you filled a room with your body when you wanted someone to feel outnumbered. Naruto counted roughly 60. He filed the number away without particular concern. Walder Frye was already in the Great Hall, which meant he'd made the decision not to come out and meet them, which meant he was trying to establish hierarchy before anything was said. Naruto walked through the courtyard with Tyrion on his left and Caitlyn on his right and did not look around with the wariness of someone entering an unfamiliar space. He looked around with the curiosity of someone visiting somewhere new. The Great Hall was dim. Walder Frye held court in the high seat like a man who had needed the extra height for so long he'd forgotten how to be eye level with anyone. He was old, truly old, the age that left nothing soft, all bone and spite and the deep-grooved cunning of a man who had outlived his relevance and was furious about it. Beside him, arranged in the way of a man who collected people because he couldn't collect anything else of value, sat various Frye sons and daughters and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a family the size of a small army and half as organized. "The demon," Walder Frye said. His voice was cracked and high and perfectly unpleasant. "You're smaller than I expected." "I get that a lot," Naruto said, and came to a stop a polite distance from the high seat. Not a supplicant's distance. A conversation distance. "Lord Frye. Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for seeing me," Walder repeated, mocking the courtesy. "Little Lord Manners. Did someone teach you that or did it come natural?" "Both," Naruto said easily. Walder's eyes, wet and sharp under their heavy folds, moved to Caitlyn. Something moved through them, not guilt, because Naruto doubted this man had the architecture for guilt, but something adjacent. Recognition. Calculation. "Lady Stark," he said. "Come to watch the show." "I came as a witness," Caitlyn said. Her voice was steady. "Good. A witness," Walder said. "To what?" "This boy coming to my hall to tell me what to do. I've had kings tell me what to do. I've outlived 4 of them." "5, one of his sons murmured. 5, Walder agreed, with grim satisfaction. "I'm not here to tell you what to do," Naruto said. Walder looked at him. "No. I'm here to offer you a choice," Naruto said. "Which is more than most people in your position get." "My position," Walder said, tasting the words. "And what is my position, little lord?" "You're a man who controls a bridge," Naruto said, simply. "That's been enough for a long time. But the world you built that significance on is changing, and you're being offered something right now by someone who doesn't care about you or your bridge or your family." He paused. "I'm here to tell you not to take it." The hall was quiet. The Frye sons and daughters were watching with the variety of expressions you got from a very large family that had been raised on a combination of resentment and self-interest, some alert, some bored, 1 or 2 frightened. Walder leaned forward in his seat. "Lord Tywin Lannister," he said slowly, "has made no such offer to me." "He's going to," Naruto said. "You don't know that." "I know Tyrion Lannister," Naruto said, gesturing sideways at Tyrion, who gave a small, precise nod. "And Tyrion knows his father. And his father has a plan that involves you, this bridge, and Robb Stark being somewhere he can't get away from." He looked at Walder steadily. "I'm asking you not to be part of that plan." Walder stared at him for a long moment. The wet sharp eyes doing their work. "And what do I get?" he said finally. "The real question. Everything before it had been theater. You get to live in your castle for the rest of your life," Naruto said. "With your bridge. With your family. With nobody burning it down or marching through it or using it as a bargaining chip in someone else's war." He paused. "I'll leave you alone completely. Forever. Which given what I can do, and I think you've heard what I can do, should mean something." "A threat wrapped in a gift," Walder said. But something in his voice had changed, some of the performance had gone out of it, and what was left was older and more calculating. "The gift is real," Naruto said. "The other thing is just context." "And Robb Stark?" Walder said. "He broke an oath to me." "He did," Naruto agreed, without qualification. That was wrong. He should have found another way. He paused, and Caitlin beside him went very still. But an oath broken badly doesn't balance against what you're being asked to consider. Those are different scales. Walder looked at him with something that was almost respect, the involuntary kind, the kind you develop for someone who didn't try to tell you the easy version. You're not telling me I'm wrong to be angry. You're not wrong to be angry, Naruto said. You're wrong about what you do with it. The silence in the hall had a different quality now. Not the tension of a confrontation but the stillness of a man doing arithmetic that had suddenly gotten more variables in it. Walder sat back in his seat. He looked old, sitting back, just old, the armor of his position falling away slightly, leaving the man inside it who had spent 80 years in a world that never quite treated him as seriously as he thought he deserved. I'll think about it, he said. Think fast, Naruto said. Lord Tywin moves fast when he's ready. He held the old man's eyes for a moment, not threatening, just present, just real, and then he turned and walked out of the hall, and Tyrion and Caitlin came with him. In the courtyard, walking back toward the gate, Tyrion said quietly, "You told him Tywin was coming for him without any evidence that, Tywin is always coming for someone," Naruto said. And Tyrion told me it would be the phrase. That's evidence enough. And do you think it worked? Naruto thought about the moment Walder's voice had changed. The moment the theater dropped. Yeah, he said. I think it worked. Caitlin said nothing until they were through the gate and on the south bank with the green fork running cold beside them. Then she exhaled, a long, releasing breath that took something with it. I've been afraid of that hall for months, she said. You don't need to be anymore, Naruto said. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the afternoon cold. You can't know that. No, he admitted. But I can make it much less likely. He looked back at the twins, both of them standing in the gray autumn light. Frey's going to decide it isn't worth it. Men like him, they're not loyal to anything except whoever makes them feel safest. I just made it very clear that betraying Rob is the less safe option. Caitlin looked at the castle. My husband trusted the wrong people, she said, not to either of them specifically. He trusted that other people shared his sense of honor. He thought it was a common language. She paused. It wasn't. No, Naruto said. But it should be. That's the whole problem. She turned and looked at him with an expression that he couldn't fully read, but which had several things in it, grief, and something else, something that was trying to be careful. Who are you? She asked. Not what are you, the question people asked when they wanted to categorize the power. Who? I'm someone who grew up being told that wanting to protect everyone was naive, he said. And spent his whole life proving it wasn't. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned her horse and began the road back south toward Riverrun. 3 days later, sitting on the roof of Riverrun's highest tower eating an apple and watching ravens go back and forth across the sky, Naruto felt it. Not felt like physically, felt the way he felt things that were large and far away, the way you knew a storm was coming before you could see the clouds. A surge of natural energy from the east and south, coming across water, massive and old and completely unlike anything he'd sensed in this world before. He stood up. Kurama, he said. I feel it, the fox said, and there was something in his tone that Naruto hadn't heard in a very long time, not quite caution, but the quality of attention that Kurama brought to things he found genuinely interesting. Something very large is flying this way. Dragon. 3 of them. Still a long way off. But coming fast. Naruto ate the rest of the apple. He stood on the roof of Riverrun and faced east and let his sage mode open just slightly, the natural energy of the world flowing into him in that slow, reluctant way it had here, and through it he could feel what was coming across the narrow sea, 3 points of enormous, ancient fire energy moving with the purposeful speed of things that didn't know anything had the right to stand in their way. He thought about what the clone memories had given him. Silver hair, purple eyes, a girl with a history longer and heavier than she was who had spent years in the East building something she called a liberation and was now coming home to claim something she'd never had. He thought about what 3 dragons meant politically, what they meant to the war, what they meant to the people in the path of them. He went downstairs and found Tyrion. "Daenerys Targaryen is coming," he said. Tyrion looked up from his parchment. He'd been writing letters. He was always writing letters, Tyrion, as though he was trying to outpace bad news with words. "How do you know?" "I can feel her dragons," Naruto said. Tyrion set the quill down slowly. "You can feel her dragons." "From here," Naruto said. "They'll make landfall somewhere on the western coast in 4 or 5 days." Tyrion stared at him. Then he picked up a new piece of parchment and said, "Tell me everything you know about Daenerys Targaryen," and when Naruto finished talking, he sat very still for a moment and said, "We need to be wherever she lands before she decides what she's doing." "Yeah," Naruto said. "I know." They made the coast in 3 days, which required Naruto to run at pace while Tyrion rode and Caitlyn stayed at Riverrun with Robb, which had been the arrangement for the last leg anyway. Tyrion's horse was a good one, fast and game, but still had to stop at dusk and rest, and so for a significant portion of the journey Naruto ran ahead and waited at the next village while Tyrion caught up, and the waiting gave him time to talk to people in those villages, which he always did. The coast revealed itself as a long gray line and then a smell and then a sound, the sea, which was not the ocean he'd crossed in his own world's wars but had the same quality, that salt and endlessness. They came to a cliff top and looked out over the water. "Where?" Tyrion asked, pulling up beside him. Naruto turned and pointed south along the coast. "That way. Moving fast." "Can they be?" The sound arrived before the sight. A low, thrumming roar that wasn't quite thunder and wasn't quite wind and wasn't quite anything else, a sound that came up through the soles of your feet and vibrated in your chest at the frequency of something very old being very awake. Then the dragons appeared above the southern headland. Tyrion's horse lost its mind. He was managing it, barely, teeth clenched, both hands on the reins, while the animal screamed and wheeled. Naruto stood on the cliff edge and watched them come. 3 of them. The largest, black, enormous, already visibly wrong in scale compared to everything else in the sky, was in front, wings spread wide, and the sound of each wing beat was a compression of air that hit you in the sternum like a closed fist. Behind it, slightly to each side, 2 more, a pale cream and a vivid green, trailing fire and the smell of something burning that had been burning a long time. They were magnificent. There was no other word. They were genuinely, furiously magnificent, and Naruto stood on the cliff edge and looked up at them and thought about Kurama, about the first time he'd seen the 9 tails in full transformation above the village, that same scale, that same terrible beauty, that same sensation of standing in front of something that could end you and being unwilling to look away. "They're not that different from me," Kurama said, and there was something in his voice, amusement, maybe, or recognition. "No," Naruto agreed. "They're not." The great black dragon, Drogon, the clone memory said, pulled up above the cliff top, its wingspan blocking out a significant portion of the sky, and looked down at Naruto with the specific quality of attention that very large predators gave very small things that refused to run. Naruto looked back up at it. Drogon made a sound. Not the roar, something lower, with a question in it. The sound of a predator encountering something that smelled wrong in its threat register. Naruto gathered a small thread of Kurama's chakra, just enough to be perceptible, not enough to be a challenge, and let it sit on the surface of his skin. A greeting, maybe. A recognition. "I know what you are. I have something like you inside me. We don't have to do this the hard way." Drogon's head lowered, slightly. Just slightly. The ships appeared around the headland, a fleet, substantial, flying the Targaryen sigil. They came into the bay below and began their careful approaches to the shore, and on the deck of the lead ship stood a small figure in gray and white that even at this distance moved with the particular quality of someone who had spent years learning not to be moved by what was in front of them and was currently being moved anyway. "Coming home." She came ashore in a small boat, with Missandei beside her and 2 Unsullied at her back, and found them waiting on the beach. Naruto had come down the cliff path at a run while Tyrion had taken the longer way and arrived 30 seconds later, slightly disheveled. Daenerys Targaryen stopped on the beach and looked at Naruto and then at Tyrion and then back at Naruto. She was smaller than the stories suggested. Most people were. She had the Targaryen coloring, silver hair, violet eyes, and a face that had learned to hold itself carefully, the way faces did when they'd spent years being watched and judged and needed to keep their private self somewhere nothing could reach it. She was carrying something behind her composed expression that he recognized too, exhaustion, the specific kind that came from caring about things and fighting for them for a very long time with no clear end. "You're the one everyone's talking about," she said. "I get that a lot," Naruto said. Her eyes moved over him. Not sizing him up the way soldiers did, but the way someone did when they were trying to locate where a thing fit in their understanding of the world and it wasn't fitting. "You sent copies of yourself to every great house." "I did." "You didn't come to me," she said, and there was an edge in it, not petulance exactly, but something real. She'd found out through messengers and rumors from Westeros. She'd been coming home to something she'd planned for years and arrived to find it rearranged. "I didn't know where you were," he said. "I knew you were coming." She looked at Tyrion. Something crossed her face, complicated, the recognition of a man who had betrayed his family for her cause. "Tyrion Lannister." "Your Grace," Tyrion said, with a bow that was genuine rather than performative. "I see you've already met our resident impossibility." "We've said 3 sentences to each other," Daenerys said. "By his standards that's a long acquaintance," Tyrion said. Drogon had settled on the cliff above them, folding his wings, watching. The other 2 dragons had landed further along the coast, their presence a constant low percussion in the air. "Walk with me," Daenerys said to Naruto. They walked along the water's edge, the sea coming in grey and cold, and Missandei and the Unsullied stayed back at a distance that said private conversation without saying it. "Tell me what you've done," she said. "All of it. Not the rumor version." He told her. Straight through, no framing, just the sequence of events since he'd arrived in the nameless village and seen the red-cloaked soldiers. The village, the clones, the sweep through every great house. King's Landing and Cersei. Riverrun and Robb and Tyrion. The twins and Walder Frey. The things he was still working on. She listened without interrupting, which he appreciated, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment, looking at the water. "And the throne?" she said. "I don't want it," he said. "You could have it," she said, bluntly. "If what you're describing is accurate, you could take the Iron Throne tomorrow and there's nothing anyone could do." "I know," he said. "And you don't want it." "I want the people in this country to stop dying for it," he said. "That's different from wanting it." She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him with those violet eyes, and the expression behind them was doing something complicated, several things at once, working against each other. "I've spent years," she said, "years building an army and freeing slaves and learning how to lead, because I was coming home to claim what's mine. Because I believe I can rule it better than anyone who's had it." She paused. "And you're telling me that the person who could have it doesn't want it and the person who wants it," she stopped. "Might not be the right question," Naruto said. She looked at him. "Who rules is the wrong question," he said. "I know you've built your whole purpose around it. I know it's real to you and it means something real. I'm not dismissing it." He turned to face her fully. "But the question that needs answering first is how many people die before someone sits on that chair? And then how many die because of the thing coming from the north? And if you can answer both of those and your answer is fewer than any other answer, then I'll stand in your corner." Daenerys was very still. "You'll stand in my corner," she repeated slowly. "If that's what this needs," he said. "I don't have an agenda about who ends up in charge. I have an agenda about what happens to the people who aren't in charge." The sea came in. The sea went out. Above them on the cliff Drogon shifted his weight and made a low sound. "You're serious," she said. "Not a question. An arrival at a conclusion." "I'm always serious," he said. "I'm just also sometimes eating an apple while I'm serious." Something moved through her face, the composed surface breaking just slightly, not into a smile exactly but into the possibility of one. "You're very strange," she said. "I've been told," he said. "And completely impossible to read." "I'm not, actually," he said. "I'm just very straightforward." People mistake straightforward for mysterious because they're not used to it. He looked at her. "What you've done, freeing the slaves in Essos, building something from nothing, making people follow you because they chose to, that's real. That matters. Don't let anyone take that away from what comes next." She looked at him for a long moment. The thing behind her eyes was doing its complicated work. "Then, you knew about the White Walkers." "I know about them," he said. "You're not afraid of them." "I'm concerned about them," he said. "That's different from afraid. And so should you be." He paused. "Your dragons are important. Really important. Not for the throne, for what's coming from the north. Fire kills the dead things. Your fire is the biggest in the world right now." Something shifted in her. He watched it, the slight squaring of her posture, the recalibration. She'd been bracing for a conversation about power and had gotten a conversation about purpose, and it had landed somewhere she wasn't ready for. "I need to see this threat for myself," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm going to the wall in 2 days. Come with me." She blinked. "Just like that." "Just like that," he said. "The faster everyone understands what's actually coming, the faster we can stop arguing about who gets to sit somewhere and start figuring out how to survive." She looked at him. Then she looked back at Tyrion, who was standing at his polite distance with an expression of someone who was trying very hard to look like he wasn't listening and failing completely. "Tyrion," she called. He came up. "Your Grace. Is he always like this?" Tyrion looked at Naruto. "I've known him for 6 days," he said. "But in my experience, yes. Completely and without variance." "And you trust him?" Tyrion was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that had weight in it. "More than I trust most people I've known for 30 years, he said. "Which either says something about him or something very damning about my 30 years. Daenerys looked at Naruto one more time. Then she said, "I need to consult with my advisors. Come to my ship tonight." "Sure," he said. She walked back toward the boats without looking back. Missandei fell in beside her. The Unsullied followed. Tyrion moved up to Naruto's shoulder. "That went better than I expected," he said quietly. "Given that you basically told the woman who's built her entire identity around claiming a throne that the throne was beside the point." "I didn't say it was beside the point," Naruto said. "I said it was the wrong first question. To her, those are the same thing." "Not after today," Naruto said. He looked up at Drogon on the cliff. The dragon looked back. That same quality of attention, measuring, categorizing. Naruto held his gaze and let Kurama's energy sit warm and present inside him, not threatening, just there. "I see you. I know what you are. We might need each other." Drogon made a low sound in his chest. Not a growl. Something else. "He doesn't eat strangers," said a voice. Naruto turned. A man, older, with a round, serious face and the look of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions, was standing nearby. He hadn't heard him approach, which was unusual. "Ser Barristan Selmy," the man said. I serve the queen." "I know who you are," Naruto said. Barristan Selmy, the greatest knight in living memory, the man who had served 3 kings and chosen, at the end, to make a different choice. "She trusts you completely." Barristan looked at him with the measuring assessment of an old soldier. She does, he said. Which is why I'm here, and not at her side. He paused. I wanted to see you without her present. See what? Whether you're what you appear to be, Barristan said. In my experience, men who appear to want nothing always want something. The question is what they haven't named yet. Naruto looked at him. And? Barristan was quiet for a moment, studying him with eyes that had watched kings and warriors for 60 years. And I think you're the first person I've met who genuinely wants what he says he wants, he said slowly. Which is either the most dangerous thing I've ever encountered or the best. He paused. I'm not sure yet which. Both, probably, Naruto said. Barristan almost smiled. It was a small thing, well controlled. The White Walkers, he said. You're going to the wall. 2 days. Take her soon, Barristan said. She needs to see it to believe it. She's a good queen, she makes evidence-based decisions. Give her the evidence. That's the plan, Naruto said. Barristan nodded. He looked up at Drogon, who was still watching. When you came up on the beach, he said, Drogon looked at you differently than he looks at anyone. He paused. He looked at you the way he looks at her. I have something like him inside me, Naruto said. He can feel it. Barristan absorbed this without visible reaction, which was the mark of a man who had decided, at some point in his life, to commit to being unshockable. Right, he said. Well. He turned to go. Stopped. Be careful with her, he said. Not physically. Her, the thing she's been building her life around. Be careful with it. She's stronger than she knows and more fragile than she shows. I know, Naruto said. He looked at Drogon one more time. The dragon held his gaze for another moment, then turned its enormous head away to look south, scanning, the instinctive vigilance of something born to watch the horizon. That evening Naruto sat on the deck of Daenerys's ship. Tyrion had gone below to speak with the advisors, which had been agreed on as the better use of his particular skills, and Daenerys came up from below and sat across from him without ceremony. She'd changed clothes. Her hair was down. She looked like someone who had made the deliberate decision to not be the queen for an hour and see what happened. Tell me about your world, she said. He told her. The broad strokes, not the details he'd given Tyrion, who had wanted the mechanics, but the texture of it. Villages and missions and the specific culture of people who had built their society around strength and competition because they'd had to and were only slowly, painfully learning they didn't have to anymore. He told her about growing up the way he'd grown up, which he did without self-pity because self-pity had never been available to him. She listened with the quality of attention she probably brought to everything important, focused, quiet, storing it. You were alone, she said. For a while, he said. Then I wasn't. How? I stopped waiting for people to decide I was worth knowing, he said. Started acting like I was, and let them catch up. He paused. It's the only thing that ever worked. She was quiet. Then, I was alone too. For different reasons, but, she stopped. She looked at the sea, which was dark now, the stars coming out hard and clear above the coast. I had Viserys and then I didn't have Viserys, and then I had Khal Drogo and then I didn't, and every time I started to know what I was, she stopped again. You kept going anyway, Naruto said. I had to. No, he said. You chose to. That's different. She looked at him. Something in her expression had moved, the composed surface had stayed but what was behind it had shifted, like a current change under still water. You're going to be an interesting problem, she said. Why? Because I came to Westeros to change it, she said. And you're already changing it. And I don't know yet whether we're changing it in the same direction. We're not, Naruto said. Not completely. You want a specific outcome. I want a specific condition, people not dying needlessly. Those overlap in a lot of places. They don't overlap everywhere. And where they don't, we'll figure it out, he said. When we get there. She looked at him for a long moment. You're very confident. About some things, he said. I'm completely unsure about a lot of things. I don't know enough about your history here, your families, your political math. I make mistakes because of that and Tyrion has to fix them. He half smiled. But about the big things, about what matters and what doesn't, yeah, I'm confident. The big things being that people are worth protecting, he said. That peace is achievable. That the thing coming from the north kills everyone regardless of what throne they sat on. He looked at her. And that you, specifically, have done genuinely remarkable things that this world needs to know about. She blinked. Whatever she'd been preparing to say, it wasn't for that. You're not what I expected, she said, which was what Cersei had said and sounded completely different in her voice. Nobody is, he said, once you actually talk to them. Below deck, Tyrion was having a much louder version of the same conversation with a man called Dario Naharis, who had the particular energy of someone who was used to being the most dangerous and interesting person in any room and had been informed, upon arriving in Westeros, that the category was currently occupied. He's not that impressive, Dario said, and Tyrion thought that was probably the most impressive thing about Naruto, that a man who had arrived in a foreign world, deployed 10,000 copies of himself, and made the most powerful lords in the land sit down and reconsider their choices, had still not inspired universal awe in people who didn't want to be awed. He made Drogon hesitate, Missandei said quietly, from her corner. Dario stopped. What? Drogon looked at him and didn't immediately try to eat him, Missandei said. That has happened twice in the world's history. Both times with the same person. She looked at Tyrion. He is what he appears to be. That's the thing about him. There's no gap. Tyrion looked at her. No gap between what he says and what he is? None, she said. I've been watching people my whole life because watching people is how you survive where I come from. He has no gap. Tyrion thought about that for the rest of the evening. He thought about it while he drank moderate amounts of the Essosi wine that was frankly superior to the Westerosi equivalent and wrote 3 letters that needed writing and listened to Dario be aggrieved at the ceiling. No gap. He thought about every person he knew, his father, his sister, every king and lord and advisor, and felt the gap in each of them, the distance between presented self and actual self, the machinery running behind the face. He thought about himself, the various Tyrions he deployed in various rooms for various purposes. And then he thought about the man on the deck above him, sitting with a queen he'd met 4 hours ago and telling her the truth about himself with the ease of someone who had never learned to do anything else. He raised his cup and drank to that, alone in the dim cabin. Outside, the dragon settled on the cliff in the dark, and the sea moved against the coast, and somewhere above it all Drogon watched the horizon with his burning, ancient eyes, and for once in recent memory the horizon was quiet. Chapter 5, The Red Wedding That Wasn't the Raven came to Riverrun at mid-morning, and it arrived the way bad news always did, not announced, not theatrical, just quietly present in Tyrion's hand between one moment and the next. A small folded piece of parchment with a fry seal that had been broken by whatever maester had received it first and then passed urgently upward until it reached the one person in the castle who would understand what it meant. Tyrion read it twice. Set it on the windowsill next to his cold tea. Looked out the window at the river for 4 seconds. Then went to find Naruto. He found him in the training yard, which should have surprised him and no longer did. Naruto was crouched in front of Grey Wind with a small rotating sphere of chakra balanced between his palms, not the full weapon, just the light and the spin, and the dire wolf was watching it with the total absorption of a creature encountering something it couldn't categorize and had decided to understand rather than flee. Rob was leaning on the fence nearby with his arms crossed and the specific expression of a man watching his dog become more complicated than anticipated. Naruto, Tyrion said. Naruto looked up. Read Tyrion's face the way he read everything, immediately, completely, without asking for help. The chakra sphere dissolved. Grey wind blinked at the empty air. Tyrion handed him the raven. Robb came off the fence. Grey wind padded after him and pressed his large head against Robb's thigh with a steadiness that felt deliberate, like the wolf could feel the shift in the yard before the words arrived. Naruto read the message. His expression did something small and controlled, a compression behind the eyes, a stillness that was different from the stillness he wore normally. He handed it to Robb without comment. Robb read it. And where Naruto had gone still, Robb's face did the other thing, the thing that happened to people who received confirmation of the fear they'd been managing in the background for weeks. A brief, visible crack. Then the king's composure came back over it. Edmure's going to the twins, Robb said. In 3 days, Tyrion said. The feast is arranged. My father's influence is all over the timing, he's been communicating with Fry for at least 2 weeks. I underestimated how fast he'd move. He said it flat and accountable. That's on me. It's not, Naruto said. I told you, we move forward, Naruto said. Not cutting Tyrion off harshly, just redirecting the energy toward the thing that mattered. What's the situation exactly? Tyrion took the raven back and looked at it again, though he already had it memorized. Edmure Tully is to attend a feast at the twins celebrating his betrothal to one of Walder's daughters. Robb will be expected to accompany him. You can't send your uncle to seal an alliance without the king present, it insults the host. Which means Robb's senior commanders all travel to the twins. Which means Tywin has coordinated with Walder to have the entire northern command structure under one Fry roof, at one Fry table, with Fry men on every door. The training yard was quiet. The river sound came over the wall, constant and indifferent. Fry agreed, Naruto said. It wasn't a question. Fry agreed, Tyrion confirmed. Whatever my father offered him was enough to make your conversation at the twins feel like a manageable risk rather than a deterrent. Naruto was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ground and Tyrion recognized the quality of his silence, not indecision, but the rapid internal assembly of a plan that was checking itself against constraints as it built. It took about 10 seconds. I'm going to the twins today, he said. It's 3 days' ride, for you, Naruto said. How fast can you get a message to your brother Jaime? Tyrion blinked. Jaime's in King's Landing, Cersei, Naruto said. Would she halt Tywin's plan if she thought it was going to blow back on the Lannister name? Cersei cares about outcomes, not methods, Tyrion said. If this works, she benefits. She won't interfere. Then I need you here, Naruto said. Working the political end. If I stop whatever's happening at the twins, Tywin is going to need a new move immediately. I need someone who can see what that move is before he makes it. Tyrion looked at him. You want me to outthink my father in real time? I want you to try, Naruto said. You're the only person who might. Something moved through Tyrion's face, not pride, something older and more complicated. The thing you felt when someone said you were capable of the exact thing you'd spent your life being told was beyond you. He absorbed it without showing it. I'll need ravens. Access to Robb's correspondence. And Varys, I need to write to Varys. Done, Robb said. Naruto was already pulling his coat straight. Robb. You're not coming. He's my uncle, and you're the reason Tywin arranged this, Naruto said. He looked at Robb directly, not unkindly, but without room for negotiation. If you're at the twins before I've resolved this, you're the primary target and everything else becomes harder. You stay here. I go. I deal with Fry. You already dealt with Fry, Robb said. He agreed and then agreed with someone else. Then I'll have the conversation again, Naruto said, except this time the consequences are standing in the room with me instead of implied. Robb's jaw set. His eyes did their gray calculation, working through it, finding the correct answer, disliking it. Gray wind pressed harder against his thigh. Go, Robb said. Naruto nodded once. Turned. Walked out of the yard at a pace that was still technically a walk for about 30 meters, and then he was running, and then by the time he cleared the castle gate he was moving at a speed that made the guards at the wall blink and look at each other. He ran northwest through the riverlands with the sky pressing low and cold overhead and the last of the autumn color bleeding out of the trees along the road. At full pace the landscape moved past in long blurring sheets, stone fences, frozen ruts in the road, a cart abandoned on a verge with one wheel missing, a village where someone was burning something in a field and the smoke sat low across the ground. He ran through it without slowing. Kurama was quiet for the first hour. Then, he moved faster than expected. Tywin always does. You're angry. Naruto thought about it. No. I'm focused. Those feel the same from in here, sometimes. I'm not angry at Fry for being persuadable, Naruto said, the road unreeling under his feet. Fry is what he is. He thought about it more carefully. I'm angry at the world that made people like Fry. That made his whole life about not quite mattering so that the first person who offered him the real thing could use him for anything. That's a generous reading of a man who's planning to kill his guests at dinner. It's an accurate reading, Naruto said. Understanding someone isn't excusing them. That distinction does a lot of work for you. It has to, he said. If I stopped understanding people the moment they did something terrible, I'd have stopped understanding everyone a long time ago. Kurama made a sound that was the equivalent of a reluctant nod. What did Tywin offer him? The fox asked. Legitimacy, Naruto said. Frey spent 80 years being the man you have to deal with, not the man you want to. Tywin offered him a place that matters. A Fry at court. Fry blood in the succession somewhere. Something that makes the name mean more than a bridge. And that's worth betraying his guests. He's telling himself it's justice, Naruto said. Rob broke his oath. In Frey's mind he's not betraying a guest, he's collecting a debt. Tywin just gave him the opportunity and the backing. The twins appeared below him on the flat horizon, both towers identical, the green fork dark and cold between them, and Naruto slowed from a run to a walk about half a mile out. Arriving at full sprint was a statement he'd choose deliberately or not at all. He chose to walk. The guards at the outer gate saw him coming from a distance and had the conversation he'd seen many times now, the recognition, the rapid summoning of someone senior. More men on the walls than his last visit. A lot more men in the courtyard when the gate opened. The Lannister presence in the livery was visible, discreet but present, 3 men near the stable, 2 more by the inner gate, carrying themselves with the particular posture of men who had been placed rather than stationed. He walked through the outer gate and across the courtyard toward the great hall, and the Fry soldiers watched him come and did not stop him, which told him Walder had already decided something. The question was what? The great hall had been rearranged. Tables set for a feast not yet begun, 3 days early, he noted, which meant the preparations were further along than the Raven had suggested. Fresh rushes on the floor. Candles already in their sconces. The specific organized quality of a room that was being prepared for an event its preparer had been anticipating. Walder Frye was in his seat. He looked different than last time. Not more confident exactly, more committed. The difference between a man considering a course of action and a man who had chosen one. He had more sons arranged around him, more household guards. And at the far edge of the high table, just present enough to be a statement, one of the Lannister men stood with his hands behind his back and watched. Naruto walked the length of the hall and stopped at the same distance as last time. Same conversation distance. Not supplicant, not threatening. You came back, Walder said. You made a different decision, Naruto said. Did I? Walder said, and the performance was back, the cracked, high voice with its grating false innocence. I've made no decisions. I'm planning a feast for my daughter's betrothal. That's all. The feast is 3 days early, Naruto said. And you have 30 more soldiers than when I was last here. A man can have a feast whenever he likes in his own hall, Walder said. And a man can have as many soldiers as he can afford to feed. Walder, Naruto said. He dropped the title without drama, just dropped it. Walder's eyes narrowed slightly. I told you what would happen. I told you clearly. You looked me in the eye and you understood me. And then someone offered you something you wanted more than you wanted: safety. He tilted his head slightly. What did he offer you? The hall was quiet. The sons and the daughters and the household guard were very still. The Lannister man by the wall had not moved. I don't know what you're suggesting, Walder said. I'm suggesting that Lord Tywin Lannister made you a promise, Naruto said. And it was a good promise. Something real. Something you've wanted for a long time. He paused. I'm not here to say the promise is a lie, I don't know if it is or not. Tywin might follow through. He's kept his word before when it suited him. He looked at the old man steadily. I'm here to tell you that the promise doesn't matter. Not because it's not real. Because I'm going to make sure it can never happen. Walder's eyes sharpened. What does that mean? If you go through with whatever's planned for this feast, Naruto said, Tywin Lannister is going to lose this war. Not because I'm going to fight him, I'm not going to fight him. Because I'm going to make sure the political situation collapses around him in ways he can't reverse. He paused. Whatever he promised you depends on him winning. I'm going to make sure he doesn't. You can't guarantee, I'm not guaranteeing it, Naruto said. I'm telling you the probability. Which is very high. Higher than his offer. He looked at the Lannister man by the wall. The Lannister man looked back, not quite meeting his eyes. And when Tywin's position collapses, the first thing everyone is going to remember is who helped him. Because I'll make sure they remember. Walder leaned forward in his seat, and the performance slipped, and what was underneath it was exactly what Naruto had seen last time, the man inside the high seat, old and calculating and furious at the world for never quite taking him seriously. You're asking me to give up the best offer I've had in my life, Walder said. For a threat. I'm asking you to give up a conditional offer that depends on a man winning a war I'm going to make very difficult, Naruto said. In exchange for what I offered you last time, which was permanent and unconditional. He paused. And I'm also asking you something else. What? I'm asking you whether you want to be the man who had guests murdered at his table, Naruto said. Not politically. Personally. He held the old man's eyes. I know you're angry at Robb Stark. I know the oath matters. I know you've been underestimated your whole life and someone finally offered you the thing that changes that. He didn't look away. But you know what you're being asked to do. And I think somewhere under all the calculation, you know what it would make you. The hall was completely quiet now. Walder stared at him. The wet sharp eyes doing their work, reading him, looking for the angle, looking for the gap. Naruto stood in front of him with no gap, the way Missandei had said, nothing between the face and the thing behind it, no performance, no position, just a person saying what he meant. Get out of my hall, Walder said. His voice had changed. The performance was gone. It was just an old man's voice, tired and something else underneath the tiredness that wasn't quite grief but was in the same neighborhood. Are you calling it off? Naruto said. I said get out of my hall, Walder repeated. Naruto looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the Lannister man by the wall. Go back to King's Landing, he said. Tell Lord Tywin his plan is done. The Lannister man opened his mouth. Now, Naruto said, and it was one word in a tone that was perfectly level and somehow carried the weight of 10,000 clones and the memory of every impossible thing Naruto Uzumaki had done since he arrived in this world, and the Lannister man closed his mouth and left. Naruto turned and walked back up the hall toward the door. Behind him, in the high seat, Walder Frye sat completely still. At the door, Naruto stopped. Robb Stark broke his oath to you, he said, without turning around. That was wrong. He should have found a better way. He paused. But you're owed an apology, not a massacre. Those aren't the same thing. He pushed the door open. Think about what you want to be remembered as. You've got time to decide. Most people don't. He walked out into the courtyard. The twins settled around him, stone and cold sky and the sound of the river. He stood in the courtyard for a moment and let the adrenaline, not fear, he didn't run on fear, but the specific high-wire tension of a conversation where everything mattered, settle back into baseline. Kurama said nothing. Just present, warm, the way he'd learned to be. Then one of Walder's stewards came out of the hall behind him. A young man, nervous, with a message in his hand. My lord says, the steward began, and stopped, because Naruto still hadn't turned around. My lord says the feast is postponed. He says to tell you the feast is postponed indefinitely. Naruto exhaled. Tell him thank you, he said. He was back at Riverrun before nightfall. Rob was in the great hall with his commanders when Naruto walked in, and the room looked up at him with the specific collective anxiety of people who had spent the day imagining the worst. It's done, Naruto said. Rob stared at him. The feast, postponed, Naruto said. Indefinitely, phrase word. A sound went around the room, relief expressed in different registers, some men exhaling, some sitting back, one grizzled commander named Great John Umber putting both hands flat on the table and staring at them as though he needed to feel something solid. Rob looked at Naruto with an expression that was trying to be controlled and not quite getting there. How? Talk to him, Naruto said. You just, talk to him. I told him the truth about what he was choosing, Naruto said. And I think some part of him didn't want to choose it. He moved to the table and sat down because he was tired, not physically, running 3 days' distance in an afternoon cost him almost nothing physically, but in the way that hard conversations always cost something. The immediate problem is handled. The larger problem is that Tywin knows his play failed. He'll move again. Tyrion, who had been at the far end of the table with a mountain of parchment and 3 empty cups and the expression of a man who had been writing letters for 6 hours straight, looked up. I have some thoughts on that. Tell me, Naruto said. Varys has been watching Tywin's correspondence for years, Tyrion said. I wrote to him this morning. He's going to make sure that certain pieces of information reach my father about the current state of the war, true information, nothing fabricated, just curated. The picture it paints is of a military situation that is significantly less favorable than my father currently believes. He shuffled through the parchment. Specifically, Rob's ford. You told Varys about the ford? I told Varys that a viable alternative crossing point in the Riverlands has been secured, Tyrion said. Which changes Rob's strategic position fundamentally. When my father recalculates the military situation with that variable included, he paused. He'll realize the Fry gambit wasn't just thwarted. It was moot. He didn't need Fry to neutralize Rob. He needed Fry because of the crossing. Without that dependency, the whole architecture changes. Naruto looked at him. You've been doing this all day. Someone had to, Tyrion said, and there was something in it, dry, slightly exhausted, genuine. You do the impossible things. I do the complicated things. Division of labor. Rob looked between them. And Tywin's next move? King's Landing, Tyrion said. He's going to consolidate. Pull back to the political center, use his small council influence to make the other houses feel uncertain, wait for the war to exhaust everyone else. He paused. It's what I'd do. It's what he'll do. Then we need to move before he settles, Naruto said. The summit, Tyrion said. Rob frowned. What summit? I've been thinking about this since the coast, Naruto said, sitting forward. Every major house, one location, one conversation. Not a negotiation, I'm not asking everyone to agree on everything. Just a ceasefire. Formal and witnessed. He looked at Rob. If I can get every major lord in the same room, with Daenerys there and her dragons visible outside and me in the middle, and ask them to agree to stop killing each other long enough to deal with what's coming from the north, how many of them say no? The room was quiet. Robb said, Tywin says no. Tywin says no publicly and agrees quietly, Naruto said. He's too intelligent to reject a ceasefire that everyone else is accepting. It isolates him. Cersei is managing her children's futures, Naruto said. She'll see that a ceasefire benefits Joffrey's position more than continued war does. Joffrey loses wars. He's not a general. Peace keeps him on a throne longer than battle does. Robb was quiet, working through it. Stannis is already there, Naruto said. He's been trying to get people to take the North seriously for years. A summit that officially acknowledges the White Walker threat is everything he's been asking for. And Daenerys? She wants to rule, Naruto said. A ceasefire that ends with her as a recognized power in Westeros is better than a war that might leave her ruling a ruin. He paused. She understands that. We talked. Robb looked at the table. At his map. At the lines drawn on it in his own hand over months of campaigning, all the distance and cost and sacrifice of it. Then he looked up. Where? Harrenhal, Tyrion said, before Naruto could answer. Everyone looked at him. It's central, Tyrion said. It belongs to no lord currently, it's been passed around so many times it's practically neutral ground. And it's large enough to hold every major house's contingent without anyone feeling crowded into a corner. He paused. It's also mildly terrifying, which sets the right tone. A silence. Then Great John Umber said, from the end of the table, the man's right about the terrifying part, which was the first time he'd spoken in an hour, and everyone looked at him and he shrugged his enormous shoulders unapologetically. Harrenhal, Naruto said. 2 weeks. Can you get everyone there in 2 weeks? Robb asked. I can be very persuasive, Naruto said. You can make 10,000 copies of yourself, Great John said. That too, Naruto agreed. Caitlin Tully came into the hall late, after the commanders had gone, when only Naruto and Tyrion and Robb remained at the long table with the remains of a meal none of them had eaten much of. She looked at the three of them and her face moved through its calculation and arrived somewhere that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. It's handled, she asked. It's handled, Robb said. She sat down. She put her hands on the table and looked at Naruto. You went to the twins alone. With Kurama, Naruto said. That's the fox inside you, she said, and it was not a question. He'd explained it to her over several conversations in the past week, and she had the quality of someone who had decided that impossible things were real once she'd seen enough evidence. And Fry listened. Eventually, Naruto said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Ned would have tried to do it the right way, she said, and her voice was careful around the name, the care of someone handling something that could still cut. He would have gone to Fry honestly and stated his case and expected good faith in return. She paused. He would have gotten killed for it. I know, Naruto said. You went expecting bad faith, she said. And you still tried to give him something real. You didn't threaten him into it, not exactly. She searched for the word. Showed him himself, Tyrion said quietly, from his end of the table. She looked at Tyrion. Then back at Naruto. Yes, she said. That. It's the only thing that sometimes works on people like Fry, Naruto said. Not force. Not logic. Just, the mirror. Most people are not doing what they're doing because they're evil. They're doing it because they've made a series of decisions that each made sense at the time, and now they're in a position where the next decision is monstrous and they've already committed. He looked at his hands. If you can find the moment before the commitment is total and show them the mirror, they sometimes choose differently. And when they don't? Caitlin asked. Then you deal with the consequences, Naruto said simply. Robb looked at him. You'd have fought them. If Fry had refused. I'd have made sure nobody died at that feast, Naruto said. However, that needed to happen. Rob held his gaze. All of them. 60 soldiers. More. All of them, Naruto said, without drama. Tyrion drank his wine. And this is why, he said to no one in particular, the conversation always comes back to the summit. Because the only thing more productive than watching him fight an army is watching him not have to. The night settled in around River Run, the river sounds constant beneath everything else. Rob excused himself eventually, a king always had the next thing waiting, and the next thing was never friendly. Caitlin lingered for a moment, said something quiet to Rob that wasn't for the room, and followed him out. Tyrion refilled his cup. Offered the skin to Naruto, who took it this time and drank. I owe you an apology, Tyrion said. For underestimating Tywin's timeline. Yes. I told you not to, I know what you told me, Tyrion said. I'm telling you anyway. My mistake contributed to a situation where things could have gone very badly. He paused. I don't apologize for things that aren't my fault, and I don't not apologize for things that are. This was mine. Naruto looked at him for a moment. Okay, he said. Apology accepted. Just like that. What else should I do with it? Tyrion thought about all the people in his life who had held on to grievances the way you held on to property deeds, as proof of claim. Nothing, I suppose, he said. Most people do more with them. Most people use apologies to establish debt, Naruto said. That's not what they're for. Tyrion drank. You're going to have to teach me how you think, he said. It's consistently unlike anything I've encountered. I'll try, Naruto said. But I think some of it is just, I grew up with nothing, so I never learned to hoard things. Anger, grudges, advantages. If I'd hoarded every bad thing done to me, I would have been carrying too much to run. Tyrion looked at him across the table in the dim hall, the candles burning low, the wine in his cup catching the light. He thought about what he knew of Naruto's history, the orphan, the monster in his gut, the village that hadn't wanted him. He thought about what those years could have made, given a different character. What they had made, instead. The summit, Tyrion said. Harrenhal. 2 weeks. He set the cup down. I'll write the invitations. Make them firm, Naruto said. How firm? Firm enough that refusing is a statement, Naruto said. Not a threat. A statement. Everyone who doesn't come is choosing not to, and they'll need to live with what that means when the rest of the great houses are looking at them. Social pressure as geopolitical leverage, Tyrion said. You're better at this than you pretend to be. I'm not pretending anything, Naruto said. No, Tyrion said. That's exactly it. You're not. He picked up his quill. Pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward him. Right then. Let's invite some very dangerous people to a castle that dragons melted. He wrote the date at the top of the first letter. I'll start with my father. He'll be the hardest. What will you say to him? Tyrion thought for a moment, quill poised. Then he wrote. He wrote with the specific efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime distilling complex realities into precise, unambiguous language, and when he was done he read it back silently, adjusted 2 words, and turned the parchment so Naruto could read it. It was short. Father, a summit at Harrenhal in 2 weeks. Every great house. The matter of the North, the real North, not Robb Stark, will be on the table. Naruto Uzumaki will be present. Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons will be present. You may attend and shape what is decided, or not attend and have decisions made without you. I am told you have never in your life allowed decisions to be made without you. I suspect this time will be no different. Naruto read it. Looked up at Tyrion. That'll work, he said. Tyrion permitted himself a small smile. I know my father, he said. Whatever else is true. He folded the letter. Reached for another piece of parchment. Now. Cersei. Outside, the river ran on as it always had. Above Riverrun the stars were out, the same stars that hung over Harrenhal to the north and King's Landing to the south and the Twins to the east and the wall far away in the dark, a thin white line against the world's northern edge where Jon Snow was counting dragonglass and waiting. In the stables, Grey Wind raised his head in the dark and looked toward the north and was still for a long moment, nostrils open, reading something on the cold air that the humans in the castle above him were not yet equipped to read. Then he put his head back down and closed his eyes, and the castle slept, and the river ran on.